Chapter 37-24. He had clearly seen Meng Tong secretly consume a medicinal pill before the other people's attention was diverted. Needless to say, it was the Grade 4 Great Recovery pill mentioned in Li Zhengming's report. As long as it wasn't a direct death blow, as long as a Foundation establishment expert still had one last breath, he could rely on the heaven-defying effect of this Grade 4 Great Recovery pill to snatch the person back from the hands of the Grim Reaper and quickly recover his vitality. If it was used on an ordinary person, as long as they weren't too weak, no matter how serious the injury was, they could recover in an instant. Perhaps a moment ago, they were on the verge of death, but after consuming it, they would immediately be full of vigor and vitality. But if it was used on an early Foundation establishment expert like Meng Tong, because the vitality he needed to replenish was far above that of an ordinary person, the effect wouldn't be so abnormal, but he would definitely be able to recover within a day. It was said that this Grade 4 Great Recovery pill was personally provided by Su Lingchong. This time, in order to deal with him, this young master Su really put in a lot of capital. However, although he saw Meng Tong violate the rules and consume the medicinal pill in advance, Lin Yi didn't plan to expose him in public. Because if he did, this Grade 4 Great Recovery pill would instantly be eaten by Meng Tong, and there would be no evidence. Moreover, the only person present who had the qualifications to check whether Meng Tong consumed the pill in advance, Elder Zhao Hongba, would definitely not stand on his side. So, instead of exposing him in public and asking for trouble, he might as well observe the situation from the sidelines. Later, he would give this group of scheming fellows a big surprise. Under the gaze of everyone present, Meng Tong walked in front of the examiner with an air of arrogance. Everyone couldn't help but secretly spit, a villain intoxicated by success. When he stood 10 feet in front of them, the examiner nodded to Zhao Hongba and Hu Yunfeng, and quietly exchanged a look with Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang, and the others. Only then did he signal the start of the test. Next is the Peak Early Foundation Establishment Level Test. Are you ready? The examiner confirmed for the last time. That's right. Come on. Meng Tong didn't even raise his eyelids, and had the demeanor of a peerless expert who viewed the examiner as grass. Fuck, if it wasn't for young Master Su telling me to go easy on you, I would have beaten you to death with one slap just because of your infuriating behavior. This guy obviously needed to cheat to muddle his way through, but he still wanted to put on a disdainful attitude. This guy clearly needed to cheat to get through, but he still wanted to put on a disdainful attitude. However, no matter how much he disliked Meng Tong, for the sake of Su Lingchong's grand plan, this examiner could only pinch his nose and endure. Not only could he not kill the opponent with one slap, but he also had to hold on. Otherwise, with Meng Tong's meager strength, if he were to really strike him with the full strength of a peak initial stage Foundation establishment cultivator, there was a 90% chance that he would be killed in a single strike. Even if he had prepared a 4th grade great cyclic pill in his mouth in advance, he still wouldn't have the chance to swallow it. Great as to Meng to a Chang to say said to say Tong great zhou if he and to say chi he as to want to defend against the examiner's attack. This was a choice that he had no other choice. Although it could not be compared to those specialized defensive martial skills, it was still somewhat effective. Especially for an expert in the early stage of Foundation establishment like him, the true chi in his body had already reached a certain level, and just relying on true chi was enough to offset the full power attack of a heaven stage paragon. But now, he was facing a Foundation establishment level attack. The damage that his chi could defend against was obviously not enough. But it was better than nothing, and it was better than doing nothing. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the examiner to make his move. After all, it was not easy to see the power of a Foundation establishment level expert in the Welcome Pavilion. And the examiner didn't disappoint. Without any preparation, he struck out with a seemingly ordinary palm, slowly but quickly. By the time it reached Meng Tong's chest, it was already carrying the force of a thunderbolt. There were so many heaven stage great perfection experts here. Just looking at it was enough to make one's heart jump. Although this palm was only a regular attack from a Foundation establishment level expert, and it didn't carry any powerful effects, its power was still not something that they, who hadn't even reached the Foundation establishment level, could defend against. Just looking at it from the side was enough to make one's heart tremble. If they were in Meng Tong's position, they would definitely die. No matter how powerful the pill was, it wouldn't be able to save their lives. Bang! The palm hit, and Meng Tong let out a muffled groan. Then he flew out like a kite with a broken string, falling for more than 10 feet. Looking at his condition, he was no longer as arrogant as before. His face was pale as paper, and he couldn't stop vomiting blood. Fuck. Fortunately, he had consumed a grade 4 great revitalizing pill just now. Otherwise, he would have died. However, even though the 4th stage great recovery pill had already begun to display its heaven-defying effects in his body, Meng Tong still couldn't stop his vision from turning black. He held on to his last breath to prevent himself from collapsing. His internal organs felt unbearable, as if they had shifted positions. This kind of feeling was worse than death. Fortunately, he had the 4th stage great recovery pill to prolong his life, so there was no danger to his life. Although Meng Tong was in a dispirited state, he was still able to grit his teeth and force himself to sit up. He began to meditate to heal his internal injuries. The eyes of the surrounding newcomers were obviously filled with shock and awe. Let's not talk about how long it would take for this guy to recover. The fact that he was able to withstand the attack and not die was already a miraculous performance. There was no need to doubt his strength. After all, these surrounding newcomers didn't know that Meng Tong had consumed a 4th stage great recovery pill. They thought that it was all because of Meng Tong's own foundation establishment level strength. This kind of performance was naturally strong. After sending Meng Tong flying, the examiner looked at Lin Yi from afar with a playful expression. It's your turn now, right? Previously, in order to kill Lin Yi, these few law enforcement hall experts went for wool and came home shorn. Because the pressure formation had mysteriously gone out of control, they had instead suffered serious injuries. They had lost all face in front of Su Lingchong, eldest young Master Su. Naturally, they hated Lin Yi because of this. Now it was finally time for revenge. This brat was merely an expert in the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. There was no way he would be able to survive the full force attack of a peak early stage foundation establishment realm expert. He could only wait to die. Sensing the fierce killing intent hidden in the examiner's eyes, Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. Chapter 37-25. However, regardless of whether it was in the mortal world or on this heavenly island, there were always enemies everywhere. Lin Yi was already used to it and didn't care about the few of them. In the end, it was still uncertain who would step on who. Under everyone's gaze, Lin Yi gave Senior Ku Bai and the others a look to reassure them. Then, he slowly walked in front of the examiner and stood 10 feet away from him. He wasn't as arrogant as Meng Tong just now. Instead, he was calm and collected with the demeanor of an expert. The examiner couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. Previously, when he saw this kid's calm and composed expression, he could still think that he was putting on a brave front. But now that he was about to die, he was still able to maintain this pretentious demeanor, and not even the slightest trace of nervousness could be seen on his face. Could it be that he saw that even Meng Tong could hold on, so this kid thought that he would be able to pass easily? That's why he was so unscrupulous? The examiner secretly laughed. This kid was an expert in the early stages of the foundational level, yet he didn't even have this much self-awareness. Furthermore, he couldn't sense the danger at all. If he died later, he really couldn't blame anyone but himself for being stupid. A sin caused by the heavens could be forgiven, but a sin caused by oneself couldn't be avoided. This kid was so stupid that even the heavens wouldn't help him. When Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang, and the others saw this scene, they immediately looked at each other and smiled as if their plot had succeeded. The deadly trap that they had deliberately set up was finally about to enter the final stage. At this point, even if Lin Yi sensed that something was wrong, it was already too late for him to turn back. He could only brace himself and carry on. Then what awaited him was a tragic death. There was no other possibility. Woo 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 woo. The suffocating atmosphere made the little curly bear in Laner's arms instinctively restless. Couldn't help but whimper at Lin Yi. As a spiritual beast, even if it was still in its infancy, the little curly bear's ability to sense danger was far above that of a normal person. It could clearly feel the danger that made it instinctively feel fear. At this moment, it was shrouding the top of Lin Yi's head. "Little Bai, be quiet." Shanghai Laner frowned slightly. Because Su Lingchong had previously revealed part of the plan to her, although she did not know the specific details, she still felt that something was wrong with the current situation. It seemed that Lin Yi had completely fallen into the other party's trap and was in a rather bad situation. However, even if she wanted to step forward to help Lin Yi at this time, he still had to worry about his previous agreement with Lin Yi. In front of others, he had to pretend that he hated Lin Yi. Otherwise, not only would he not be able to help Lin Yi, he might even bring him more trouble. Although Shangguan Laner was not a scheming person and gave people a feeling of naivety. However, this did not mean that she was stupid. On the contrary, when she really wanted to think about something, she was much smarter than most people. Since Lin Yi asked her to cooperate and act in front of others, she could guess that there must be a deeper meaning behind it, even though he didn't specify what it was for. Analyzing the reason, most of it was to numb some people. If these people saw that she had a close relationship with Lin Yi, because of her special identity, it would easily bring trouble to Lin Yi, a grassroots newcomer from the secular world. It might even be a big trouble like getting himself killed. Therefore, in front of outsiders, she must keep a distance from Lin Yi. This was a kind of disguised protection for Lin Yi. And if she stepped forward to stop it now, not to mention whether she could really help Lin Yi, at least this layer of disguised protection would naturally be broken. This was not a good thing for Lin Yi. Therefore, even if she knew that Lin Yi's current situation was not good, after struggling for a long time, Shanghai Laner did not step forward to stop it. It was not until Lin Yi quietly gave her a reassuring look that the big stone in her heart finally fell to the ground. This little junior brother Lin Yi. As expected, he had the confidence to deal with this crisis. Although she knew that this kind of challenge was extremely difficult, although she had only met Lin Yi a few times, and was not clear about how much confidence Lin Yi had, but Shanghai Laner instinctively chose to believe in Lin Yi. She believed that her little junior brother would definitely be able to pass this challenge easily. "Please." Lin Yi raised his hand slightly, indicating that the examiner could begin at any time. Pretentious. The examiner curled his lips in disdain, then quickly mobilized the qi in his body and gathered it on his palm. Very quickly, it reached the upper limit of the seal. But this was not the end. Even if he had already reached the upper limit of the seal, he could still continue to mobilize the remaining qi through the gap in the seal. It was just that it was more difficult to mobilize and the amount was limited. After accumulating his qi for a while, the qi gathered on the examiner's palm finally reached its limit. Impressively, it had already far exceeded the level of a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert, exceeding by more than 30%. This time, it was different from when he was facing Meng Tong. The palm that sent Meng Tong flying did not have any frightening aspects at the beginning. It was only at the moment when it hit Meng Tong did it explode with a thunderous power. But this time, even if the examiner had not made his move, just by condensing the qi, everyone present had already started to feel fear. It was as if a storm was coming, and the pressure was so great that they could not breathe. Why did it feel like this palm was much stronger than the one he had used against Meng Tong? Everyone could not help but feel a trace of doubt in their hearts. But because they were experts at the peak of heaven stage, they did not have a deep understanding of the peak early stage foundation establishment, so they treated this thought as an illusion. Because Pavilion Head Hu Yunfeng had said very clearly that every examiner's strength was fixed by the seal. For attacks of the same level, it was impossible for one palm to be lighter than the other, so this strange thought must be an illusion. But how could this be an illusion? The palm that Meng Tong faced just now only had 70% of the power of a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, but the palm that Lin Yi faced now had 130% of the power of a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, almost twice the power of the previous one. Naturally, the power could not be mentioned in the same breath. Oh no! Junior brother Lin has fallen into a trap. The bitter senior brother's heart instantly tightened. He was different from these newcomers. It was normal for newcomers to not understand the strength of a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, But how could he not understand? Chapter 37:26. Furthermore, he had been in the 3 pavilions for quite some time now and had seen plenty of early-stage foundation establishment cultivators. However, it was already too late for Ku by Shixiang to realize that something was amiss, because the examiner was already smiling viciously at Lin Yi, unleashing a strike that was far beyond the peak of the early phase of foundation building. Die in peace, pretentious newbie. Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang, and the rest smiled gleefully at the same time. Lin Yi was a newbie from the secular world. Although he had performed miraculous feats, he had overestimated himself and could only stop here. Even though they were enemies, they had to admit that Lin Yi was indeed a genius. In the future, he might become a huge problem for them. Unfortunately, the world of cultivation was never short of geniuses. The feeling of killing a genius with one hand was truly wonderful. However, in the next moment, the smiles on their faces froze. Bang! The examiner's palm landed on Lin Yi's chest with twice the force from before. He had thought that Lin Yi would be sent flying further than Meng Tong and fall more miserably. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, Lin Yi merely grunted and took a step back. That was all. At the same time, just as the examiner's momentum was about to reach its limit, he suddenly felt a strong wave of vital energy bite him. He grunted and took a step back as well. This was Lin Yi using the rich vital energy in his body to passively defend and attack. This was also known as an offensive defense. Compared to purely passive vital energy defense, this method could greatly reduce the damage. Although the effect was not as good as a defensive technique, if one was skilled enough, it would not be too far off. This was a method that Lin Yi had come up with on a whim. He never thought that it would actually work. The scene. In an instant, everyone present, including Elder Zhao Hongba, Su Lingchong, and Meng Jueguang, were all dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? This kind of scene gave people the feeling that 2 experts of the same level were facing off head-on. Therefore, both of them took a step back. But the problem was, how was this a head-on clash between 2 experts of the same level? It was only the examiner who had slapped Lin Yi once. An all-out attack that exceeded the might of the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment by 30% landed on an expert of the early stage of foundation establishment. Not only did it not kill the other party, but it instead forced the other party to take a step back. This doesn't make sense. Thank you for your guidance. Not only did Lin Yi not die from having his tendons and meridians shattered as everyone had hoped, he even spoke without a change in his expression. Only then did he let out a long breath of turbid air and sat down on the ground to begin recovering from his injuries. Holy shit! The examiner looked at Lin Yi in disbelief, then turned his head to look at Su Lingchong and the rest who were similarly dumbfounded. Everyone had an expression as if they had seen a ghost. His mouth was so wide open that it could fit a basket of eggs. Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang looked at each other dumbfoundedly and saw that this fellow's old face was flushed red. Flustered and exasperated, he said, "That's impossible! That's impossible! This kid must have already suffered a fatal internal injury. All the tendons and meridians in his chest have been shattered. He's just hanging on with his last breath." He had planned in every possible way beforehand. Moreover, he had gotten young Master Su to step forward and clear up all the joints. He had even given a 4th-grade great rejuvenating pill as his capital. With such a perfect plan, Meng Jueguang simply did not believe that there was a possibility of failure. If it was said that Lin Yi had shrunk back in advance and given up on the points for this match, although it was regrettable, at least it was more understandable. But the situation before their eyes was completely incomprehensible. He was clearly an early-stage foundation establishment expert. He had clearly suffered a fatal palm strike with 130% of the peak of the early-stage foundation establishment's power, yet he still looked as if nothing had happened. Was this possible? Based on this fellow's usual pretentious behavior, it's not impossible for him to continue pretentiously until he dies. It's very possible that he'll just die sitting there. Su Lingchong was similarly unwilling to believe that such a perfect plan would have such an outcome. Like Meng Jueguang, he still held onto the last strand of luck. However, after a short while, Lin Yi slowly stood up amidst the exclamations of the entire audience. He cupped his hands towards Zhao Hongba and said indifferently, "Elder Zhao, I've already finished healing my injuries. Elder, please examine me." Zhao Hongba was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted. He walked in front of Lin Yi and examined him. His tone carried a trace of unconcealable shock as he nodded helplessly. "That's enough. There really aren't any obvious injuries." Even if he was an elder, he couldn't distort the truth. If he were to lie in front of everyone, Lin Yi could casually slap his face. Then, he really wouldn't be able to keep his integrity in his old age. How was this possible? Hearing Zhao Hongba's words, Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang's last strand of luck was finally completely shattered. They were so depressed that they almost spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, both of their faces were ashen, as if their own father had died. At this moment, there was only one sound left in the entire audience: the sound of people gasping in shock. Zhao Hongba's words meant that not only did Lin Yi obtain the 30 strength points that the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment stage represented, he also obtained recovery points that were equivalent to 100% of his strength points because he had recovered within 2 hours. In other words, he obtained 30 recovery points. Adding the 2 points together, Lin Yi's total score for the second segment was 60 points. Because the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment stage was the second segment with the highest difficulty, it also meant that the 60 points that Lin Yi had obtained was the highest score that he could obtain in this segment. In addition to the full score of 45 points in the first segment of the suppression stage, Lin Yi had already obtained 2 God-level full scores after completing only 2 segments of the assessment. His total score had reached a godlike 105 points. On the other hand, Meng Tong, who was full of self-satisfaction and had sworn to trample on Lin Yi with all kinds of arrogance, was still sitting at the side healing his injuries with a pale face. He was afraid that the slightest bit of relaxation would cause the effects of the 4th grade recover pill to dissipate, leaving behind a sequela. Looking at his appearance, being able to recover within a day was already not bad. In other words, although this fellow had the same 30 points as Lin Yi, his recovery points would at most be 60% of his strength points, which was 18 points. Adding the 2 points together, the total score for the second segment of the suppression stage was 48 points. In addition to the 24 points from the first segment of the suppression stage, adding the 2 segments together, Meng Tong's total score was only 72 points, which was a full 33 points difference from Lin Yi. Not only did he not take the opportunity to kill Lin Yi, he did not even have the most basic intention of catching up points. Instead, the difference in points was widened by Lin Yi. Chapter 37-27. After all, when he got full marks last time, they could still think that it was because of some problem with the pressure formation, and that Lin Yi had gotten lucky. But this time, he was relying on real strength. He got full marks in 2 consecutive rounds. If this kind of performance didn't make people realize how awesome Lin Yi was, then they could only say that these people's brains had been kicked by donkeys. "Junior brother Lin, you're really good. If it was me, I wouldn't have been able to take that hit." Senior brother Bitter Guy rarely showed such an excited expression. He clearly saw the danger of that hit just now. If it was him, he wouldn't have been able to survive, let alone be as relaxed as Lin Yi and survive with such a minor injury. What he didn't know was that Lin Yi's injury just now was not as light as it looked. Although he had the strength of the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm and had figured out the trick of using genuine chi to attack and defend, the lethality of that hit just now was comparable to 130% of the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. Even if it was on Lin Yi, it was still not to be underestimated. However, because of the art of dragon mastery and the space in the jade pendant, even if the injury was serious, Lin Yi could easily and quickly heal quickly. That was why he could do it so calmly and dazzle everyone's eyes. Not only senior brother Bitter Guy, but also Xiao Ran, who had recovered from his injury, looked at Lin Yi with a burning gaze. He was so excited that he gave a thumbs up, and his admiration was overflowing. After all, this guy was a calm and introverted person. He was never good at expressing his feelings, let alone losing his composure when he was excited. But today, Lin Yi's performance really opened his eyes. Lin Yi could be the first to succeed in the foundation establishment realm. This could only mean that he was talented, but it didn't mean that he was really awesome. But as a newcomer in the secular world who had only been in the Welcome Pavilion for a month, he was able to withstand the full blow of a peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm so easily. This was really awesome. Not to say that it was unprecedented, but it was definitely not an exaggeration to say that it was domineering. In the past, Xiao Ran only thought that boss Lin Yi, whom he was following, was a kind and honest person with great strength. But after today he had to add another label to it, tyrannical beyond compare. Even though Xiao Ran had been calm since he was a child, he couldn't help but feel a burning passion in his heart at this moment. If he followed such an overbearing and powerful boss like Lin Yi, his future would definitely be boundless. This was what Xiao Ran thought. Li Zhengming, who was Lin Yi's underling, was thinking. At this moment he was even more shocked than him. It had to be known that he was different from Xiao Ran. Not only was he born on Heaven Stage Island, but he also came from the Clearwater Villa and had a superior family background. He had seen far more of the world since he was young than a newcomer from the secular world like Xiao Ran. But even so, Lin Yi's performance today almost made him bite off his tongue. He even unconsciously gave birth to a feeling of worship and awe from the bottom of his heart. Li Zhengming couldn't help but murmur. No wonder boss Lin Yi clearly knew that the opponent had tampered with the situation and still dared to calmly accept the challenge of the early stage of foundation establishment. He even dared to calmly accept the challenge of a peak early stage foundation building cultivator. It seemed that his foresight wasn't bad. He followed an extraordinary fellow. This lady really didn't make a mistake. Junior Lin Yi really hid his strength. Shanghai Laner couldn't brazenly show too much excitement, so she could only whisper excitedly to the little curly bear in her arms. Woo 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 woo. The little curly bear wrinkled its nose proudly. That goes without saying. TSK. I don't know who was the one who was so anxious just now. Shanghai Laner didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she rolled her eyes at it. Lin Yi was the last newcomer from Blue Cloud Pavilion to go on stage for the assessment. After he finished, it meant that all the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion had finished their assessment. Next, they just needed to wait for the newcomers to finish healing and they would be able to get the final points of the second round. After Blue Cloud Pavilion, it was Mysterious Pavilion's turn, and finally Blaster Pavilion's turn. With the previous performance of the Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomers as a reference, whether it was the newcomers from Mysterious Pavilion or Blaster Pavilion, the choices they made were obviously more rational and reliable. In addition, their strength was higher than the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion, so their overall performance was naturally higher. However, it was worth mentioning that other than Meng Tong and Lin Yi, no newcomer from the other two pavilions dared to challenge the difficulty of the early stage of foundation establishment. Even the two early stage foundation establishment masters, Kang Mingming and Zhong Pingliang, chose to challenge the early stage foundation establishment and didn't have any thoughts of skipping levels. After all, they weren't as strong as Lin Yi, nor did they have a fourth-level recovery elixir like Meng Tong. If they challenged the early stage foundation establishment peak, even if the examiner intentionally went easy on them, there was still a high chance that they would be killed in one move. It was better to play it safe. Anyway, the assessment points of the three pavilions were calculated separately. So what if Lin Yi got more God-level full marks? It had nothing to do with them. While the newcomers from Mysterious Pavilion and Blaster Pavilion were undergoing their assessment, the examiner in charge of the early stage foundation establishment peak was pulled to a corner by Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang. They wanted to know how Lin Yi was able to survive in such a situation, and so easily at that. Ma Jian, what happened just now? Did you use your full strength to deal with Lin Yi? Or did you secretly go easy on him, holding back like Meng Tong just now? Su Lingchong asked with an unfriendly expression. He couldn't understand what had happened today. No matter how he thought about it, he could only attribute the reason to Ma Jian. Other than this guy secretly going easy on Lin Yi, no other reason could explain how Lin Yi was able to pass so easily. In reality, even if Ma Jian secretly went easy on Lin Yi, it would still be impossible for Lin Yi to pass so easily. Think about it, Meng Tong, a guy who was on the same level as Lin Yi in name, had taken a 4th-level recovery elixir like the 4th-level recovery elixir and suffered a palm strike with 70% of the early-stage foundation establishment peak strength. Even now, he was still half dead. However, although it was hard to understand, compared to the nonsense of Lin Yi being able to easily withstand 130% of the early-stage foundation establishment peak strength, this explanation was much more convincing. Young Master Su, you're being wrongly accused. I really used all my strength just now. I didn't hold back at all. Ma Jian saw that Su Lingchong was doubting him. His face instantly paled and he hurriedly cried out his innocence. Chapter 37:28. Really? Su Lingchong sized him up from the corner of his eyes. His expression was still doubtful. Absolutely. Ma Jian nodded his head heavily and hurriedly said, if I didn't use too much strength, I wouldn't have been caught off guard and rebounded by Lin Yi's true energy. What? True energy rebounded? That brat Lin Yi has such an ability? Su Lingchong was instantly flabbergasted, and he and Meng Jueguang looked at each other in dismay. Both of them were shrewd people, and from Ma Jian's current expression, they could basically determine that this fellow shouldn't be lying. They faintly felt that they seemed to have grasped the key point. True energy rebounded? Brother Lu, could it be that this brat Lin Yi has actually cultivated some kind of defensive martial skill? Meng Jueguang hurriedly asked. It should be, otherwise there's no way to explain why the true energy in this brat's body could rebounded onto my body. But I don't know what kind of defensive martial skill it is. Ma Jian nodded his head. Ever since he finished the test for Lin Yi, he had been pondering over this question. No matter how he thought about it, in the end, he could only conclude that it was a defensive martial skill. Otherwise, there was no other explanation. One had to know, disregarding those who specialized in defensive martial skills, ordinary cultivators could at most mobilize their true energy to defend against a portion of the damage. The only difference was the amount of damage they could defend against. As for people like Lin Yi who took advantage of the opportunity to use true energy to counterattack, it was simply unheard of. What he didn't know was that this was just an idea Lin Yi had come up with in a moment of inspiration to counter his attacks. Attacking and defending was a pure coincidence. If it was under normal circumstances, even if an ordinary person wanted to strengthen their defense, they would definitely choose to cultivate a defensive martial skill. This was the most orthodox and effective choice. If it was in a state of battle and there was no chance to make a last-minute effort, then in a situation where they knew their defense was not good, an ordinary person would focus on thinking of ways to avoid the opponent's attack, and not foolishly stay on the spot and let the opponent hit them. Even if he couldn't avoid the attack, he would definitely think of a way to counteract the other party's attack. He wouldn't have the time to come up with some strange idea of using his true chi to attack and defend. The so-called offensive defense that used the true chi in one's body was completely a strange product that was produced under the special circumstances of the resistance assessment. Because of the rules of the examination, when faced with the examiner's attack, the newcomers could neither dodge nor counterattack. They could only stand there and let the examiner hit them. This left the rookies with only one choice, and that was to quickly use a defensive martial technique. If he didn't, he could only rely on his jinchi to endure it. However, Lin Yi had never been the kind of person who was willing to be beaten up. Even when faced with this kind of test, he would try his best to fight back within the rules. Because from a certain point of view, offense was the best defense. That was why he had thought of using the jinchi in his body to counterattack the moment the examiner attacked him. But if he was still a heaven-rank great perfection expert, then even if he thought of this idea, it would be useless because a heaven-stage great perfection expert could only release true chi through their palms, and if he did so, it would obviously violate the assessment rules. The key was, Lin Yi was no longer a heaven-stage great perfection expert, but a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert who had hidden his true strength in front of everyone. In fact, when he had just succeeded in building his foundation, he had already realized that compared to when he was at heaven-stage great perfection, there was a huge difference in the way he released his true chi. That was, not only could he release his true chi through his palms, he could also do it directly from the acupoints all over his body. In most cases, this was not of much use, because even if he could directly release true qi from the acupoints all over his body, true qi could only be true qi and could not achieve the powerful effect of a martial technique. In other words, if Lin Yi wanted to display the effect of the Raging Fire 8 trigrams palm, then he would have to rely on his hands. It was impossible to achieve this by using the acupoints all over his body. And if it was purely releasing true qi, it could be used to scare some small fries, but it would be very difficult to pose a threat to experts of the same level, so it was not practical. However, being able to release true qi from the acupoints all over his body, in a special situation like the resistance assessment, coupled with the offensive-defensive idea that Lin Yi had come up with, produced an unimaginable effect. When the examiner's palm hit Lin Yi's chest with 130% of its power, before it could cause any damage, the first thing it collided with was the powerful true qi erupting from the acupoints on Lin Yi's chest. And because the space in the jade pendant could quickly replenish his true qi, Lin Yi did not have to worry about the true qi in his body being completely depleted. So he could be unrestrained, using all his true qi to counterattack. In this way, before the examiner's attack with 130% of its power had reached its target, a portion of the damage had already been neutralized. By the time his palm actually hit Lin Yi's chest, it was actually only left with less than 100% of its power. As a true early-stage foundation establishment expert, Lin Yi had to take a full blow from an expert of the same level head-on. No matter how heavily injured he was, it would definitely not be fatal. And with his art of dragon mastery combined with the endless pure true qi in the space in the jade pendant, healing this bit of injury was a piece of cake. That was why the scene that had blinded the eyes of everyone present had appeared. Taking a full blow from a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert head-on, and yet being able to recover from his injuries in such a short time without a change in expression. However, Su Lingchong and the others had no idea that Lin Yi had so many trump cards to rely on, and it was even more impossible for them to understand the various details within. From their point of view, if they wanted to explain this matter, there was only one possibility, and that was that Lin Yi had cultivated some kind of defensive martial arts technique. I'm guessing that my 130% attack just now had been neutralized at least 90% by this kid's defensive martial arts technique. In other words, the actual damage that hit his body was actually less than 40%. That's why he was able to sustain such light injuries. Ma Jian deduced. At the side, Meng Jueguang nodded in agreement. That's right, he's an early-stage foundation establishment expert like Meng Tong. In theory, there shouldn't be too much of a difference in their endurance. Meng Tong had only taken a palm attack with 70% of its power, and had even taken a 4th-grade Great Rejuvenation pill, yet he was still so heavily injured that he looked like he was on the brink of death. If it were Lin Yi, he would probably be in a similar state. So the only logical explanation is that the defensive martial arts technique he had used just now was rather powerful, enough to neutralize most of the damage from Brother Ma's palm. That's the only logical explanation. Chapter 37-29. As an expert who had just advanced to the early stage of the foundation establishment realm, he had mastered a defensive martial skill that could allow him to withstand an all-out attack from an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. Even in young Master Su's eyes, it was already enough to meet the standard of concealment. The key point was that in the past month or so, they had not found any signs on Lin Yi's body at all. He had really hidden himself well. Little did they know that this was purely their own imagination. Although Lin Yi had many trump cards, he did not have this type of defensive martial skill. They had really thought too much this time. Indeed, it's all my fault for not noticing this beforehand. This brat took advantage of the loophole and caused the plan to fail. Young Master Su, please punish me. Meng Jueguang hurriedly apologized with a face full of regret. Su Lingchong's face was gloomy and he did not speak for a long time. This time, in order to kill Lin Yi, in order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he had put in a lot of effort and capital. Not only did he come forward to persuade Zhao Hongba, the 4th elder of the Blue Cloud Pavilion, he even did not hesitate to take out a grade 4 Great Recover pill. In the end, not only was Lin Yi completely fine, but he had also obtained a full score of the god level just like last time. All his investment had gone down the drain. This was not the key point. Young Master Su's capital was lost. Even if it was the expensive grade 4 Great Recover pill, he did not care much about it. The key point was that this time, he had lost face in front of Shangguan Laner. 3 days ago he had already lost face in the law enforcement hall, and now he had lost it again. If this went on, how would he have the face to face Shangguan Laner in the future? Don't forget that his grandfather, Su Yuanzheng, had given him a death order to climb up the Shangguan family's high branch. Whether the Su family could truly enter the ranks of the top wealthy families in the future depended on him alone. Looking at Su Lingchong's extremely unsightly expression, Meng Jueguang could not help but feel anxious. He did not even dare to breathe loudly, for fear of provoking young Master Su's anger. Strictly speaking, although they did not succeed in dealing with Lin Yi, Meng Jueguang's performance was commendable. After all, from their point of view, if it wasn't for Lin Yi's powerful and evil defensive martial skill, it would be impossible for anyone else to fail. To put it bluntly, this was not his fault at all. He, Meng Jueguang, could not be blamed for not doing his best. He could only blame Lin Yi for being too strange. But something went wrong. Meng Jueguang was the mastermind behind the plot against Lin Yi. If he didn't take the initiative to apologize, how could young Master Su get off the stage? All right, it's not your fault this time, Elder Meng. So what if Lin Yi escapes this time? He's still a fish on our chopping block. He won't be able to jump around for long. Su Lingchong suppressed the anger in his heart. He patted Meng Jueguang's shoulder comfortingly. After all, Su Lingchong was the future successor of the Su family, taught by Su Yuanzheng. He was not a pure hedonistic second generation. He knew that if he wanted to be successful, apart from being able to lose, he also needed to be tolerant. And from Meng Jueguang's previous performance, he was indeed a talent. It was just that he was buried because his background in Blue Cloud Pavilion was too poor. It was just right for him to take him in and use him. Thank you for your magnanimity, young Master Su. Elder Meng will definitely go through water and tread on fire for young Master Su in the future. Meng Jueguang hurriedly flattered and expressed his loyalty. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In this way, he could continue to look forward to his position as the third pavilion master. Being able to lose, being tolerant, coupled with his deep background and generous spending, this young Master Su was really a wise leader. Su Lingchong smiled. Then, he sternly instructed, although we have plenty of opportunities to crush Lin Yi like an ant, we still have to learn from this lesson. Next time, before we deal with him, we must first understand his background to avoid any accidents. Meng Jueguang nodded repeatedly. He patted his chest and guaranteed, don't worry, young Master Su. This time, when we go back, I will let Meng Tong, Li Zhengming, and the others find a way to understand Lin Yi's background to ensure that the next plan is foolproof. Good, then it depends on your performance. Su Lingchong nodded, and his gaze immediately fell on Shanghai Laner in the distance. His headache now was how to explain to this little junior sister why he failed twice in a row. As a dignified young master of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he ended up stumbling in the hands of Lin Yi, a newcomer in the secular world. This matter was really a bit unjustifiable. Fortunately, there were no other young masters present. Otherwise, Su Lingchong would really lose his face. After hesitating for a long time, Su Lingchong braced himself and walked to Shanghai Laner's side. With an embarrassed expression, he whispered, "Little junior sister Laner." This time, because of the lack of information, Lin Yi took advantage of the loophole. But don't worry, next time he won't be so lucky. Senior brother, I will definitely teach him a good lesson to vent your anger. Humph! Shanghai Laner snorted. Originally, she didn't intend to pay attention to him, but after thinking about it, she still added, remember to inform me next time. Of course, of course. Su Lingchong hurriedly nodded in response. He was afraid that Shanghai Laner would ignore him from then on. As long as this little girl was willing to come out with him, everything would be fine. In this way, he still had to properly thank Lin Yi. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to ask this little girl out. This was a good opportunity to take more contact with her, win her heart, and lay a good foundation for him to win her heart in the future. Unbeknownst to him, Shanghai Laner was purely considering for Lin Yi's sake. If Su Lingchong had any plans, she could know in advance and inform Lin Yi. Although it was the same as the previous 2 times, Su Lingchong wouldn't tell her the specific details, but she could still get a general idea so that Lin Yi could prepare in advance. However, what Shanghai Laner didn't know was that Lin Yi had successfully planted 2 spies in Su Lingchong's group, Zhong Pingliang and Li Zhangming. If she was included, then there would be 3 spies. The scale of the intelligence team was simply unprecedented. If Su Lingchong's group could still mess with Lin Yi, then the sun would really rise from the west. In just a short half a day, all the newcomers from the 3 pavilions had completed the assessment. However, the second segment was not over yet. After all, there were so many newcomers who had not recovered from their injuries. Before their injuries were completely healed and they confirmed that they had obtained the corresponding recovery points, according to the rules, they could only stay in the main hall of the Welcome Pavilion. Otherwise, their recovery points would be counted as 0. Chapter 3730. Once fairness was lost, the so-called newcomer assessment would be completely meaningless. This was because, no matter how much effort was put into it, it would be impossible for the newcomers with true potential to stand out. The 3 pavilions had invested so many cultivation resources, it would really be a waste. However, those who had yet to recover from their injuries needed to stay in the Welcome Pavilion to receive supervision. Newcomers like Lin Yi, who had already been examined by Zhao Hongba, were not subject to this restriction. They could return to their cave abodes early to carry out their daily cultivation. In consideration of the newcomers who were more seriously injured in this segment, the 3rd segment of the newcomer assessment would begin in 10 days. Normally, 10 days was enough for a rookie to recover from his injuries, no matter how heavily injured he was. If he had not recovered after 10 days, then the rookie would not have much of a future. So what if it affected his performance in the next round of the assessment? They were all trash anyway, and trash never had human rights. For a newcomer like Lin Yi who had completely recovered on the spot, these 10 days were a very rare opportunity to rest and recuperate. According to the rules of the assessment announced on the announcement, the subsequent segments would not end on the same day like the previous 2 segments. Instead, it would be a rather long battle of attrition. Not only would it consume one's physical strength, but it would also consume one's mental energy. Hence, if one did not take the opportunity to recuperate, it was very likely that unexpected problems would occur. Apart from recuperating in these 10 days, the ambitious newcomers could also specifically prepare for the next segment of the assessment. Although it was also a last-minute effort, it was better than not doing it at all. However, while the others were smug and preparing for the next segment, Lin Yi did not take this matter to heart. He cultivated when he needed to cultivate, mined when he needed to. His daily routine was exactly the same as before. When the others saw his leisurely manner, apart from feeling envious, they did not dare to say anything to mock him. After all, he had 2 God-level full marks in his hands. His superhuman strength had been completely revealed. Naturally, he had the capital to be leisurely. At this time, if they still mocked him like before, it would only mean that they were idiots. In these 10 days, Lin Yi also received information from Li Zhangming. Meng Jueguang and his gang planned to use all sorts of methods to understand his strength in the next segment of the assessment. He had to think of all kinds of ways to figure out the ins and outs of his strength, especially this defensive martial skill that he had hidden so deeply. Defensive martial technique? When he first received the report, Lin Yi was completely stunned. It was only after he read Li Zhengming's explanation of why this group of people came up with this speculation that he came back to his senses. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was clearly a stroke of genius. In the end, people thought that he had purposely hidden a strong defensive martial technique. The development of this matter was a little strange, making Lin Yi blush with shame. However, this was also good. Meng Jueguang and the others thought that after they figured out the reason, they would no longer question why he was able to withstand the 130% power of the early stage of foundation establishment. This way, at least Lin Yi's true strength would not be exposed, which was a good thing. As for the so-called defensive martial skill, since this group of people like to guess like this, then let them guess. The more they guessed, the better. Maybe when the time came, Lin Yi wouldn't even need to do anything. They would guess it themselves, and it would save a lot of trouble. In addition, what Lin Yi had to do every day was to go to the Spirit Jade Hall to dig in the mines during the day and steal 2 or 3 pieces of waste jade. At night, he would come back to continue cultivating and consolidate the strength of the early stage of foundation establishment. However, before entering the next segment of the assessment, there was still an important event waiting in front of Lin Yi. The monthly open day of the inner street had finally arrived. Since the last time he saw the star inkstone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi had been thinking about it and made all sorts of preparations for it. After all, this damn thing was once one of the strongest people in the entire heavenly island. Something that even he had to look up to was definitely not an ordinary thing. Lin Yi was naturally determined to get it. However, thinking of the last time he met the inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion who was similarly interested in the star inkstone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. Although the star inkstone's price of 1,000 spirit jades was enough to make most people shrink back, and because of its unattractive appearance, very few people would pay attention to it. Even less people would spend so many spirit jades to buy a broken stone of no use at all. However, there were still people in the world who knew what was good for them, such as that inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Judging from his performance at that time, this inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion should not have enough spirit jades on him. Moreover, although he was from the Soaring Sky Pavilion, apart from young masters like Su Lingchong who had an extremely deep background, 1,000 spirit jades was still a huge sum of money for the majority of the inner disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was not that easy to gather. However, if one really wanted to do it, if one was really determined to get it, it might not be impossible to gather 1,000 spirit jades. At least, Lin Yi had heard from senior brother Ku by that some of the inner disciples of the 3 great pavilions were privately taking loans at high interest. If one went through this route, although the price was huge, and could even be said to be absolutely disastrous, it was not difficult to gather 1,000 spirit jades. Lin Yi didn't know whether that inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion was as determined to get it as he was, and even more so didn't know how determined that person would be for the star inkstone. However, at this moment he already felt an indescribable pressure. If that person really gritted his teeth and gathered 1,000 spirit jades, and if that person had the right to freely enter and exit the inner streets, unlike him who had to wait for the inner streets to be opened, then he would really miss the opportunity to obtain the star inkstone. Moreover, an entire month had already passed. Apart from that person, could there be other competitors who knew what was good for them? Perhaps that piece of star inkstone had already fallen into someone else's hands? For a moment, Lin Yi actually felt a little worried about his personal gains and losses. However, he immediately reacted and laughed in spite of himself. If I get it, I'll be lucky. If I don't, it's my fate. Regardless of whether I can get it or not, as long as I do my best, there's nothing to regret. After calculating the date, in the wee hours of the inner streets being opened to the public, Lin Yi put on the 1,000-thread mask and left under the stars and the moon. He planned to rush to the Hong Merchant Guild to snatch the star inkstone as soon as the inner streets were opened to the public. If he arrived and discovered that the star inkstone had already been bought by someone else, then he could only say that this was his fate and that he was not the fated person for the star inkstone. Chapter 37-31. However, though the inner street wasn't open to the public yet, the outer and middle streets already had many vendors opening their stalls. Though there weren't many customers right now, to these vendors the market wasn't just a place to sell their wares. To some extent, it was also a place to purchase goods. The so-called purchase meant that many people would sell some of the heavenly materials and earthly treasures they had obtained through various channels to the merchants in the outer and middle streets at a price slightly lower than the market price. These merchants could then resell the treasures to others in the following market transactions and earn the difference in price. The reason why these people didn't directly set up their stalls in the market and sell their wares to customers at a higher price was because they had their own concerns. First of all, they weren't traditional vendors. They weren't popular in the market and they didn't have much credibility. Even if they set up their stalls, they may not be able to sell their wares in a short amount of time. Secondly, the methods they used to obtain treasures of heaven and earth were usually not so legitimate. If they were to be displayed in broad daylight, it was very likely to cause trouble for them. At that time, once they were targeted in the marketplace, it would be difficult for them to escape. Therefore, to these people, instead of setting up their own stalls, it was more convenient to sell their wares to the vendors here. Though the price would be lower, they would be able to get spiritual jades at the same time. This would save them a lot of unnecessary trouble. Therefore, a unique phenomenon formed in the market. Most of the vendors would set up their stalls very early in the morning. But before the sun rose, they wouldn't sell their wares and would only purchase their wares. The reason why they set their stalls at midnight, a time when there were very few people, was for the sake of secrecy. The people who sold their wares needed to be as inconspicuous as possible, and the vendors didn't want to be surrounded by people when they were purchasing their wares, because if they did, their bottom price would be leaked. It would be very difficult to do business. Looking at the busy scene, Lin Yi suddenly had an idea. If he wanted to buy something, he could choose this time to buy it before these people sold their wares to the vendors. If he intercepted their wares in advance, the price would be much cheaper than buying them in the market. However, on second thought, this idea wasn't very reliable. After all, these people had their own network of connections. Even if you had a lot of spiritual jades in your hands, they wouldn't necessarily be willing to sell their treasures to you. They might not even be willing to sell their treasures to you directly. Who knows if you are reliable? To dispose of stolen goods, one had to be reliable. People would definitely choose a familiar face and not a stranger. However, although this occasion wasn't suitable for buying things, it was suitable for selling things. And Lin Yi suddenly remembered that in his jade pendant space, there was really a pile of good things that could be exchanged for spiritual jades. This item was the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard that he had hunted in the outskirts of the back mountain. Although it wasn't a rare heavenly treasure, as a rare early-stage Foundation establishment spirit beast, its carcass was no less valuable than a heavenly treasure. He should be able to sell it for a good price. However, the most valuable part of the corpse, the inner core, had already been dug out by Lin Yi in advance. It was not because he wanted to use it, but because the ghost had asked for it. As a senior who lived in the space of his jade pendant, Lin Yi naturally agreed to such a small request from the ghost and took it out without hesitation. However, the ghost did not say what it wanted the inner core for. It only asked Lin Yi to take it out and temporarily store it for it. That was all. Seeing that it was still early, Lin Yi turned around and went to a secluded place with no one around. He took out the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard from the space of the jade pendant and dragged it out from the corner. Although the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard was heavy, weighing more than a ton, it was not difficult for a peak early-stage Foundation establishment expert like Lin Yi to carry it. However, the commotion he made along the way was not small and quickly attracted the attention of the people in the marketplace. "This is the nine-tailed cloud leopard?" Those with good eyesight quickly recognized it and gasped. Admittedly, to the cultivators in the marketplace, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was only at the early Foundation establishment stage and was not very strong. However, this was a famous and extremely cunning, ferocious beast of the forest. This kind of spiritual beast was famous for its cunning and ferocity. If one wanted to hunt it in the deep forest of the back mountain, even an expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm wouldn't be able to do it, let alone an expert at the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. In theory, to hunt such a cunning, ferocious beast would require at least 2 mid-stage Foundation establishment experts. In addition, they would have to spend a great deal of patience and energy in the deep forests of the mountains. Only then would they have a chance of successfully killing it. It would not be an exaggeration to say that among all early Foundation establishment spiritual beasts, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was not only one of the strongest, it was also the most troublesome, ferocious beast to deal with. Many times, even mid-stage Foundation establishment experts would not be willing to provoke it. Spirit traders in the marketplace, there were quite a few merchants in the market. Every day, one could see the corpses of all kinds of spiritual beasts being dragged here to be sold. However, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was extremely rare. In the eyes of the merchants in the marketplace, the the nine-tailed cloud leopard's strength could not be considered high, but in terms of rarity, it could definitely be ranked in the top 5. Moreover, the nine-tailed cloud leopard's entire body was a treasure. Whether it was the bones or the internal organs, every part of it was a real treasure. This was a rare and highly sought-after commodity. For a moment, Lin Yi unexpectedly became the focus of all the spirit traders. Some of them even impatiently crowded around him, afraid that others in the same trade would beat them to it. After all, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was a rare resource that could be used to establish a brand. It was something that could only be encountered by chance. If they missed this opportunity, they would never be able to find another shop like this one. Brother, how are you going to sell this nine-tailed cloud leopard? Are you going to sell it as a whole or retail sale? Seeing that other merchants were hurrying over, a bearded middle-aged man closest to Lin Yi hurriedly asked, "Oh, what about selling it as a whole? What about retail?" Lin Yi raised his eyebrows and asked without batting an eyelid, "If you sell it as a whole, then you sell it as a whole at a fixed price. If you sell it as a retail, then you have to separate the body parts and sell them one by one according to their value." The bearded middle-aged man paused for a moment, then asked, "Brother, you look unfamiliar. You don't come to this marketplace often, do you?" Chapter 37-32. Then I suggest you do a better job. Although the price will be higher if you sell it at retail, you're not familiar with the people here, so you might not be able to sell it all in a short time. Brother, you also know that although the carcass of this early-stage foundation establishment spirit beast doesn't decay that fast, once it's cut open, the spiritual energy will quickly dissipate. After a long time, it will depreciate. What do you think, brother? The middle-aged, bearded man analyzed with a sincere look on his face. Moreover, it's illegal to sell the carcasses of spirit beasts in private. Without a strong background, it'll be troublesome if the spirit beasts of the South Island find out about it. Of course, brother, you don't have to be afraid of trouble. I'm just reminding you. Oh, let me think about it. Lin Yi responded noncommittally, but he didn't directly answer how he wanted to sell it. Although this middle-aged bearded man spoke very sincerely, and it sounded like it was true, he was a merchant here after all. He couldn't appear too impatient when dealing with merchants, especially when there were many merchants coming over to ask for a price. If he rashly gave the other party any promises now, it would be difficult to sell it at a higher price later. Seeing Lin Yi's unshakable expression, the middle-aged bearded man could only sigh helplessly. He originally thought that Lin Yi was unfamiliar, so he wanted to trick Lin Yi into selling it to him at a fixed price before the others. As long as Lin Yi nodded slightly, according to the rules of the market, others wouldn't be able to compete with him at a higher price even if they wanted to. Unfortunately, although Lin Yi was young, he had seen enough of these things, so he wouldn't be easily fooled. In less than a moment, the number of merchants who surrounded Lin Yi to express their interest in the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard had reached 5 or 6. Lin Yi smiled secretly. This could practically be a small auction. However, this was a good thing. With so many people competing with each other, at least he didn't have to worry about losing out. Seeing that almost everyone had arrived, Lin Yi didn't want to delay any longer and make too much noise. After all, he still had important matters to attend to. He immediately cupped his hands towards these merchants and said, "Everyone, I intend to sell this nine-tailed cloud leopard carcass. If you are interested, please name a price. According to the market rules, the highest bidder wins." The reason why he chose to sell them in bulk instead of retail was naturally to save time. Otherwise, he might not be able to sell them all even if he stayed here for a whole day, let alone finishing within an hour before the inner street opened. Furthermore, even if it was not because he was in a hurry, Lin Yi would not covet this little bit of spiritual jades simply because he wanted to keep his identity a secret. After all, there was only 1,000 silk mask. If this face was recognized by others, it would not be easy to use it to hide one's identity in the future. The merchants looked at each other, their eyes filled with helplessness. Although it was a common market rule that the highest bidder wins, as sellers they were very happy to see such a scene. But now they were in the position of the buyer, which was somewhat disadvantageous to them. Because if they were to fight to the death, The one who would benefit in the end would not be any one of them, but only Lin Yi, the seller. And yet, even though they knew that this wasn't a good deal, they could only grit their teeth and continue. After all, this nine-tailed cloud-piercing panther was a strategic and rare resource. If they just ignored it and allowed it to be bought by others in the same trade, then in the future a large number of their customers might be snatched away. That would be a truly disastrous loss. Originally, Lin Yi had just thought that this corpse was useless to him, and that piling it up in the jade pendant space was a waste of space. As such, he might as well sell it for some spiritual jades. From the very start, he had never expected that this situation would be so advantageous. It seemed that his luck today wasn't bad. He should be able to earn quite a bit of spiritual jades, which would be just enough for him to go to the inner street and compete for that piece of staring stone. "Brother," before bidding, "can we first inspect the corpse to see if it's intact?" one of the merchants asked. Lin Yi nodded. "Of course. Apart from the Niden, which I've already taken out, I haven't touched any other parts. You can inspect it yourselves." All of the merchants present were experienced people. Whether or not the corpse had been tampered with, they only needed to casually flip it over to see. There was no way it could be hidden from their eyes and ears. After flipping through the corpse, they nodded in satisfaction. Normally speaking, the most important and valuable part of a spirit beast's corpse was its Niden. Once the Niden was dug out, while the other parts weren't completely worthless, their value would drop by at least half. But to these merchants, who weren't interested in this, as long as the corpse was intact enough to prove that it was a cloud nine-tailed panther, they would be able to use this as a pretext to obtain their eyeballs. That was enough. As for whether or not the Niden was still there, that was actually a secondary problem. Because in the end, even if it was a cloud nine-tailed panther's Niden, it was only an early-stage Foundation establishment Niden. It was essentially no different from the Niden of other spirit beasts of the same level. Although it wasn't cheap, it wasn't all that rare. However, these people were, after all, merchants. They definitely wouldn't pass up on an opportunity to haggle. Although the corpse of a cloud nine-tailed panther is relatively rare, because its Niden has already been dug out, the price has to be reduced by quite a bit. How about this? I'll bid 80 spirit jades. 80 spirit jades? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows without batting an eyelid. But he didn't say anything. The last 2 times he had come to the market square, he had seen the prices of some spirit beast corpses. Spirit beasts at the early stage Foundation establishment stage were generally priced at more than 100 spirit jades. Furthermore, they were all corpses without Nadens. For a rare commodity like the cloud nine-tailed panther, even if these merchants wanted to make a profit, there was no way they would lower the price to such a low price. A price of 80 spirit jades was simply bullying a layman like him. Although Lin Yi didn't say anything, his disapproval was already very clear. The merchant who had just bid couldn't help but curse at his miscalculation. He wanted nothing more than to slap himself in the face on the spot. Out of a professional habit, he had subconsciously wanted to squeeze as much as possible out of Lin Yi. He hadn't reacted in time. With so many people in the same trade as him, this wasn't a situation where he could lower the price. It was more like raising the price. Chapter 37-33. With just one sentence, the surrounding merchants immediately glared at him, especially the merchant who had just made a bid. His face was flushed red, but he seemed to be quite afraid of this middle-aged, bearded man. He only dared to be angry but did not dare to say anything. 150 spiritual jades? Lin Yi's heart stirred. This price could not be considered low. At least, among all the early Foundation establishment realm spirit beast carcasses he had seen before, this was already the highest price. This bearded middle-aged man was indeed quite straightforward. Seeing that Lin Yi was a little tempted, the other merchant beside him couldn't help but become anxious. He hurriedly said, "I'll pay 160 spirit jades." The bearded middle-aged man glanced at the man, and without even lifting his eyelids, he immediately raised the price. 180 spirit jades. When the others saw how wealthy and confident he was, they all felt helpless. Although the carcass of a nine-tailed cloud leopard was extremely rare, it was still an early-stage Foundation establishment realm spirit beast. This price had already exceeded the upper limit. If they raised the price even more, even if they managed to get their hands on it, even if they successfully sold it, they wouldn't be able to make much profit. They would just be working for Lin Yi, a stranger they had never met before. But even so, a merchant gritted his teeth and increased the price. I bid 185 spiritual jades. However, before Lin Yi could react, the bearded middle-aged man immediately called out, 200 spirit jades. With that, all the other merchants stopped talking. If he were to purchase the corpse of an early Foundation establishment spirit beast for more than 200 spirit jades, even if it was an extremely rare cloud-piercing panther, it would be a loss. It would be impossible for him to make any profit. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but think highly of this bearded middle-aged man. To be honest, the first impression that this person gave him was that he was a typical businessman. He seemed sincere and enthusiastic, but in fact he was secretly scheming. Who knew when he would be ripped off by him? But now, it seemed that even if this person was a businessman, he was also a bold one. For the corpse of a cloud-piercing panther without a Niden, he dared to offer a high price of 200 spirit jades without batting an eyelid, making his competitors speechless. This kind of boldness was not something an ordinary person could have. Lin Yi looked at the other people's faces, and he was sure that they wouldn't be bidding anymore. Just as he was about to make his decision, a passerby sighed and looked at Lin Yi. This is a rare item. It's hard to come by. It's a pity to sell it. Lin Yi couldn't help but be stunned, and he carefully sized up this person. His appearance was ordinary, and his clothes were rather sloppy and ordinary. It could even be said to be shabby, and his strength couldn't be considered to be very strong. He only looked like he was at the peak of the early stage of Foundation establishment, so he was not conspicuous at all in the crowd. However, after taking a closer look, Lin Yi realized that this person's temperament was rather different from others. It was not the temperament of a genius, but the temperament of a scientist who persistently studied something all year round. If he had to find someone around him as an example, this person gave Lin Yi the feeling. He was somewhat similar to Han Jingjing. Although Han Jingjing was a little muddle-headed in her daily life and didn't seem to have any special talents, when it came to alchemy, her talent could be said to be unprecedented. If she really developed, she could even belong to the kind of phenomenal existence that could turn the entire alchemy world upside down and lead the future of change. And this ordinary-looking person in front of him also had such an extraordinary temperament. It was just that his talent might not necessarily be in alchemy. Before Lin Yi could speak, the middle-aged bearded man beside him became anxious. He glared at this person and said unhappily, "Trash King, you poor fellow, what nonsense are you spouting? I offered 200 spirit jades to buy this brother's cloud-piercing panther corpse, and you actually say it's a pity? If you have the ability, then give me a higher price. Let alone 200 spirit jades. You probably can't even take out 20 spirit jades." The person called Trash King immediately became embarrassed. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he couldn't help but wave his hands in embarrassment and say, "I'm not saying that selling it for 200 spirit jades is a pity. The price of 200 spirit jades is indeed very high, but some things can only be found by chance and are priceless. If the front claws and tail of the cloud-piercing panther were used to forge weapons, the value of the forged weapons would be at least over 2,000 spirit jades. TCH, you're just bluffing. With your Trash King skills, you can forge weapons worth 2,000 spirit jades? Who are you trying to fool?" The middle-aged bearded man glared at him, then turned to Lin Yi and explained, "Brother, don't listen to this kid's crazy talk. This kid is the most unpopular inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion. His name is Wang Lanpa, and he doesn't know how to do anything but forge weapons. He even calls himself a master blacksmith. He often buys the leftover bits and pieces of spirit beast corpses from us, but he's never forged anything decent. They're all a pile of trash, so we always call him Trash King." Listening to the middle-aged bearded man's introduction, the Trash King was so anxious that his face turned red. He hurriedly explained, "That's because you guys don't know anything about blacksmithing. When it comes to blacksmithing, quality trumps everything else. A true master blacksmith will use the worst materials to forge the best weapons. As for the success rate, it's only secondary. I'm just a little lower. As far as I know, you've never truly forged a weapon successfully, have you? How dare you say that your success rate is just a little lower? The middle-aged bearded man and the others who knew about this guy burst into laughter. Blacksmithing masters only talk about quality, not success rate. What do you amateurs know? The Trash King continued to defend himself with a flushed face. However, judging from the reactions of the crowd, it was obvious that his efforts were in vain. Lin Yi, who was watching coldly from the sidelines, could not help but smile when he saw this. This Trash King was an interesting person. He was like the Kong Yi of the cultivation world. Just as the crowd was teasing the Trash King, Lin Yi suddenly asked, "Brother Wang, did you just say that the front claws and tail of the nine-tailed cloud leopard are good materials for forging weapons?" The crowd was stunned. They stared at Lin Yi strangely and exchanged glances with one another. Does this guy really believe the Trash King's nonsense? Chapter 37-34. Unfortunately, before Lin Yi officially agreed to sell the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard, he could do whatever he wanted with it. No one else had the right to intervene. Therefore, even if the middle-aged bearded man was full of anger, he could only vent his anger on the Jinx King of Junk. Seeing that Lin Yi seemed to believe his words, the King of Junk suddenly became spirited. He nodded repeatedly without caring about other people's expressions. It's definitely a good material that can only be found by chance. If it can be used to cast weapons, its value will definitely be far more than 200 spiritual jades. Thank you for your advice. Lin Yi pondered for a moment, then turned to the middle-aged bearded man and said, "I'm sorry. I plan to keep the front paw and the tail for my own use, and sell the rest as a whole. Do you still want to buy it? Of course, the price can be lower." Don't forget, Lin Yi was also a blacksmith, just like the King of Junk in front of him. It was just that he didn't have a master, no information, and no crafting scroll, so he couldn't try. Now, after hearing the King of Junk's reminder, he suddenly had an idea. Instead of selling the front paw and the tail, he might as well keep them for his own use. He couldn't find a blacksmith in the secular world before, but this was the Heaven Stage Island. As long as he was willing, it wasn't difficult to find information about blacksmithing, and he might even have the chance to become a real blacksmith in the future. The King of Junk in front of him, who claimed to be a blacksmith master, was the proof. Hearing Lin Yi's suggestion, the middle-aged bearded man frowned, but then he patted his chest and said with a forthright expression, "Anyway, I'm buying the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard to make a signboard, not to sell it. You can keep the front paw and the tail if you want, as long as the rest can be used as a signboard. But as for the spiritual jades, I'll still give you 200 spiritual jades. Just treat it as making a friend. I, Chun Hei Hu, won't be so stingy over such a small amount of spiritual jades." Chun Hei Hu? Lin Yi was a little surprised. "My surname is Chun. Hei Hu is the nickname given to me by the people in the market. How about it? Fits my image, doesn't it? How should I address you, brother?" Chun Hei Hu laughed and deliberately stroked his thick beard. Thank you very much. My name is Lin Er." Lin Yi nodded and casually came up with an alias that he had never used before. Chun Hei Hu nodded and immediately ordered a servant beside him to cut off the front claws and tail of the cloud-piercing leopard. At the same time, he picked out 200 pieces of good jade full of spiritual energy and handed them to Lin Yi. "Brother Chun Hei Hu, since my cloud leopard's body isn't complete, it's not a very good one. You're very generous, giving me 200 spirit jades, but I can't just accept it like that." Lin Yi waved his hand. "I saw it in your friend's backpack, but I can't accept it just like that. There are also some spiritual jades of poor quality. Why don't you give me those spiritual jades?" Chun Hei Hu stared blankly. He didn't expect Lin Yi to not be a greedy person. He did have some spirit jades of poor quality. You can't pick your customers when you're doing business, right? You have to take whatever people give you. Of course, those spiritual jades were usually given in threes. If it was just one, he wouldn't do it. Chun Hei Hu thought for a moment and said, "There's no need for that. Those spiritual jades aren't of good quality and aren't full of spiritual energy. Since we're brothers, I naturally can't cheat you. Although this exchange would save him a lot of money. He could save a lot of money, but he was a straightforward person, so he didn't care about that. That's right, that's why I'm doing this. Lin Yi said resolutely, otherwise, I won't be able to do business with you next time. Seeing Lin Yi's determination, Chun He-hu could only nod and say, then I'll take advantage of you this time. Brother Lin, if you hunt any spirit beasts in the future, you must take care of me. Don't worry. The price will definitely satisfy you. The reason why he was so straightforward before, apart from needing the nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard, was because he wanted to make friends with Lin Yi. Of course, now he felt that not only was Lin Yi's strength superb, but his character was also very good. Because Lin Yi didn't intentionally hide his strength. Chun He-hu could clearly feel that Lin Yi was only an expert in the early stage of the foundational realm. He wasn't considered strong on Heaven Stage Island, where foundational realm experts were everywhere. However, the more it was like this, the more precious Lin Yi was. It wasn't rare for an expert in the middle stage of the foundational realm to be able to hunt a nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard. However, for an expert in the early stage of the foundational realm, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Those who could do this were all geniuses among men. As a shrewd and experienced businessman, Chun He-hu had his own way of looking at people. He knew who had a bright future and needed to befriend as much as possible, and who didn't have a bright future to look at. In his eyes, Lin Yi was naturally the former, while the tattered king was the latter. Of course, Lin Yi nodded. In the future, he would have to deal with all kinds of powerful spiritual beasts. If he hunted and killed any spiritual beasts, he could sell them to Chun He-hu to save himself some trouble. After chatting with Chun He-hu for a while, Lin Yi saw that the sky was getting brighter. It was almost time for the back street to open. Lin Yi immediately said goodbye and left. However, after a few steps, he suddenly felt that someone was following him. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that someone was greedy for money? Although 200 spiritual jade was not a lot, it was enough for some people to take the risk. Under the cover of the gradually increasing crowd, Lin Yi turned around and observed for a while. Then he found that the person following him was the tattered king. Lin Yi was puzzled. Why was this guy following him? Did he really want to kill him? But it didn't look like it. Judging by the strength of this guy, he was definitely not strong among the experts in the early stage of the foundational realm. He shouldn't be so daring as to target him, right? Seeing that Lin Yi had noticed him, the tattered king quickly walked up to him. After a moment of hesitation, he plucked up his courage and asked, Brother Lin, what do you plan to do with the front claws and tail of the nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard? Huh? Lin Yi was even more puzzled. I can use my own things however I want. Why should I tell an outsider I don't know? Chapter 37-35. Lin Yi nodded. It was easy to understand. In theory, being a blacksmith was even more expensive than being an alchemist. It was normal for an inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion like the worn-out king to be unable to cook without rice. Pausing for a moment, the tattered king took a deep breath and stared at Lin Yi with a burning gaze. The front claws and tail of the cloud nine-tailed leopard are both rare materials that can only be found by luck. If second brother Lin trusts me, you can come to Clear Cloud Pavilion anytime. I'm willing to forge weapons for you for free. I see. Only then did Lin Yi figure out the worn-out king's intention. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he asked, May I know where your master is? Is there a place in the 3 pavilions that specializes in training blacksmiths? The worn-out king was stunned for a moment. He replied, No. Blacksmiths are a very unpopular profession. As far as I know, there aren't many serious blacksmiths in the North Island, but there are quite a few in the Middle Island. As for my master, I learned from a blacksmith master named Sun Sikong by chance for a few days. The rest is what I learned from the materials. Don't worry, I can't boast about anything else, but I'm definitely good at forging weapons. Can't boast about anything? Lin Yi could not help but laugh. But Chun He-hu and the others just said that you've never succeeded in forging weapons? Ah, The worn-out king choked. No matter how much he thought of himself as a blacksmith genius, it was a bloody fact. That was why people called him the worn-out king. I believe you'll succeed. If there's a chance in the future, I'll come to Blue Cloud Pavilion to look for you. Lin Yi smiled at him. He had a good impression of the worn-out king. He could tell that the worn-out king was a guy with real skills. However, even if he only had the worst materials, he still insisted on forging top-notch weapons. It would be a miracle if he could succeed in forging weapons with such a weird philosophy. In any case, the front claws and tail of the cloud nine-tailed leopard were useless in his hands. If he had the time in the future, he might as well look for this fellow and study it together. Perhaps they could really forge something decent. Are you really willing to believe me? The king of junk was overjoyed. Originally, he didn't have any expectations for this matter. He just didn't want these good casting materials to be wasted, but he didn't expect Lin Yi to agree. One had to know that although the profession of being a blacksmith had always been sought after, there were only a handful of people who could truly live up to this title. For a blacksmith like the king of junk who had never forged a decent weapon, he was a complete joke in the eyes of others. No one would take his words seriously. It was even more impossible for them to hand over their rare materials to him, not even if the king of junk volunteered to forge for free. Because once these materials were used to forge, there would only be two results. Either they succeeded and became a part of the divine weapon, or they failed. From then on, it became a pile of trash and no longer had any value. With the king of junk's embarrassing history, how could he succeed? Only a ghost would believe him. Oh, even a ghost would not believe him. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that out of 10,000 people, 9,999 people would not believe in the king of junk's ability. However, he was lucky today. He met the last person who was willing to believe in him. To him, this was probably the last straw to clutch at. If he couldn't seize this opportunity to clear his name, he might have to spend the rest of his life with this embarrassing title of King of Rags. Seeing that Lin Yi nodded affirmatively, the king of junk was so excited that he couldn't speak coherently. Then, thank you so much. Brother Lin, don't worry. I'll definitely forge something good for you. I won't waste these great materials. Whenever you're free, come find me at the Blue Cloud Pavilion. I'll be waiting for you. All right, I've got some urgent matters to attend to at the moment. I'll be counting on you when the time comes. Lin Yi responded, although he believed that the king of junk had the ability to forge weapons. After all, the guy's embarrassing zero success rate was right in front of him. He had to be careful. If he handed the materials to the king of junk hastily, it might really go to waste. Therefore, even though he had promised the king of junk to help him forge weapons, Lin Yi decided to follow him throughout the process. He could also observe and learn how to forge weapons. No matter what, the king of junk was a proper blacksmith. His attainments in the aspect of blacksmithing were much more profound than that of a layman like Zhang Tai, who had to fumble around by himself. After all, although Lin Yi had repaired the godly pesticide cauldron, expanded the space of the jade pendant, made the essence necklace, and forged the heaven-level heavenly weapon by himself, these could not be considered as real forging weapons. If he wanted to forge a real heavenly weapon by himself, he still had to put in the effort and learn systematically. That was because forging weapons was not based on a blueprint. It required creation and combining different materials into one. It was not simply based on a blueprint. There were thousands of materials in the world. If everyone could forge the same heavenly weapon, what would be the difference? In this aspect, no matter how bad the reputation of the king of junk was, he was qualified to be Lin Yi's teacher. Lin Yi would definitely benefit a lot from observing and learning together. However, although he had agreed to it, Lin Yi estimated that it would take at least a few months to ask the king of junk for help. That was because the time spent on forging weapons was far more than that on refining elixirs. Could easily take a few months or even 8 to 10 years. Moreover, Lin Yi had to deal with the newcomer's assessment in the welcome pavilion. He did not have that much free time. Therefore, he could only wait until the matter was over. Well, it's okay. Brother Lin, you can do as you please. The patience of a blacksmith is not for show. I can wait no matter how long it takes. The king of junk did not care at all and kept nodding. For him, it was already a great thing that Lin Yi had agreed to let him forge weapons for him. As for waiting for a period of time, it was not a problem at all. He could wait no matter how long it took. At this moment, the king of junk even began to think about which auxiliary materials to match the front claws and whiptail of the nine-tailed cloud-piercing bag. Although it was very difficult for him to get anything good with his ability, if he could use some of the scraps in the corner well, it could also have an unexpected magical effect. This was where his core value as an armament master was reflected. Chapter 37-36. What an eccentric scientist! Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh. Not only was he not offended, he even thought more highly of this guy because of this. After all, the profession of forging weapons was the same as alchemy. It was necessary to study hard. The more one could calm down and think deeply, the more likely he was to make a breakthrough. The eccentric character of the king of junk might not be suitable for dealing with people, but it was not necessarily a bad thing for a forging weapon master. Lin Yi smiled and immediately ignored him. He turned around and walked to a secluded corner. After putting the bag of spirit jade and the front paw and tail of the cloud-piercing leopard into the space of the jade pendant, he then walked towards the inner street. At this time, it was just in the middle of the morning. When Lin Yi walked to the entrance of the inner street, the guards had just moved out the sign for the inner street to signal the people who had been waiting here for a long time to enter. With the first batch of people pouring into the inner street, Lin Yi went straight to the Hong Chamber of Commerce. He couldn't wait to know whether the piece of star inkstone he had been longing for was still there. He entered the attic of the Hong Chamber of Commerce with familiarity, quickly walked up to the second floor, and went straight to the corner where he had found the star inkstone last time. However, when Lin Yi glanced at it, his heart immediately sank. The display case was empty, and the star inkstone was gone. Was he going to miss the opportunity in the end even though he had rushed over so quickly? Lin Yi smiled bitterly. Although he was unwilling, there was no other way. He was going to walk around casually and then go back. After all, it was his luck to get it, but it was his fate to lose it. He had already been mentally prepared for this. However, just as he was about to give up, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a staff member of the Hong Chamber of Commerce carrying an exquisite wooden box as he passed by. The mysterious aura emanating from the wooden box caused his heart to palpitate involuntarily. This situation was exactly the same as when he had discovered the star inkstone. Could it be that the star inkstone was in the wooden box? Lin Yi suddenly had a strong intuition. He hurriedly followed the footsteps of the staff, and then found that the box had been sent to a private room on the side. The last time Lin Yi came here, he had specifically asked around and found out that this private room was a place on the second floor that was specially used to trade valuables. After all, wealth should not be exposed. Some precious treasures that were worth hundreds or even thousands of spirit jades should be traded in a secret place, no matter if it was due to sentiment or reason. If it was placed in a crowded public place like the lobby on the first floor, it would easily attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. The Hong Chamber of Commerce was rich and powerful, so there was nothing to be afraid of. However, customers who had spent a large sum of spiritual jades might not have such confidence. If someone were to follow and launch a sneak attack after leaving the Hong Clan Merchant Association, not only would their treasures be stolen, but they would also be wasting a large amount of spiritual jades. In serious cases, they might even be killed. This was no laughing matter. Therefore, for the sake of protecting the customer's privacy, the Hong Chamber of Commerce had specially set up this private room specifically for the trading of valuable items. If a customer had his eye on any valuable treasure outside, he could just go in and discuss the deal with the shopkeeper. The staff of the Hong Chamber of Commerce would help him pack it up, and no outsiders would be able to see what was inside and have any ill intentions. The door to the private room was not tightly shut. It was only ajar. After all, as a businessman, they had to open their doors to welcome customers from all over the world. They could not possibly close down their other businesses just to protect the customer's privacy. That was unrealistic. To be able to specially set up a private room to help customers avoid unnecessary trouble, the Hong Chamber of Commerce was already very considerate. Through the ajar door, Lin Yi immediately saw a familiar figure inside, and his heart skipped a beat. This figure. It was the inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion that he had seen last time. Although he was dressed in ordinary clothes instead of the iconic attire of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Lin Yi could still tell that this person was the same person as the one from last time. If he had only guessed that the wooden box might contain a star inkstone. Then now, after seeing this competitor, Lin Yi was already completely certain that the contents of this wooden box were undoubtedly the star inkstone. Immediately after, Lin Yi heard the shopkeeper say to this person, "You can open it and check to see if it is what you want. If you are interested, then according to the previous price it will be 1,000 spirit jades. Due to the large amount of spirit jades, the Hong Chamber of Commerce can send someone to your residence to collect it." 1,000 spirit jades. It was indeed a star inkstone. Lin Yi's heart jumped. After taking a deep breath, he walked into the private room before that person could finalize the deal with the shopkeeper. "Dear customer, what can I do for you?" The shopkeeper immediately turned and smiled at Lin Yi. Although he still had to take care of the deal with this person, this did not prevent him from entertaining Lin Yi. After all, anyone who had the confidence to enter a private room was a nouveau riche with a large amount of spirit jades in their hands. They were the gods of wealth that merchants like them needed to focus on entertaining and winning over. Before Lin Yi could reply, this inner sect disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion looked at him warily. Lin Yi recognized this person without a doubt. This person was the competitor for the star inkstone that he had seen last time, Yuzha. After glancing at Lin Yi, Yuzha also quickly recognized Lin Yi's identity. His heart was instantly filled with shock. He knew that since Lin Yi had appeared here at this time, his intentions were most likely the same as his own. He had also come for the star inkstone. Taking advantage of the fact that Lin Yi's gaze had yet to fall upon the wooden box, he quickly and calmly closed the lid, not wanting Lin Yi to see that the box contained a star inkstone. Although in his eyes, Lin Yi was nothing more than a poor wandering cultivator, and in theory it was impossible for him to have so many spirit jades to purchase the star inkstone. Since Lin Yi had dared to enter this private room, it meant that he most likely had some confidence. Just in case, it was better to cover it up a little. After all, if Lin Yi really did discover the star inkstone in the wooden box and wanted to compete with him on the spot, that would be somewhat troublesome. Unbeknownst to him, Lin Yi had long since determined that the wooden box contained the star inkstone. At this time, no matter how much he tried to cover it up, it would be futile. However, Lin Yi's expression did not change, and he did not even glance in his direction. Instead, he directly said to the shopkeeper, "Shopkeeper, I saw a piece of star inkstone here last time. Do you still have it in stock?" When these words came out, the originally somewhat nervous Yuzha's heart immediately trembled. What he feared had really come. Being asked such a question by this fellow Lin Yi, how could a wily old fox like the shopkeeper, who had spent many years in the sea of business, not be unable to detect the business opportunity here? Chapter 37:37. This time, no matter how much Yuzha tried to hide it, it was useless. Looking at the shopkeeper's excited expression, looking at Lin Yi's loathsome face, he wanted to slap himself across the face. If he had known that someone like this would suddenly appear, he would not have said another word and immediately sealed the deal. There would have been no need to drag his feet and have someone bring the item over to inspect it. Now, he had been too smart for his own good. He had been forced to the point where he had to compete with someone else. He had been caught in his own trap. But now that things had come to this, no matter how much regret he felt, it was useless. Right now, the most important thing was to obtain the star inkstone at all costs. This was his greatest hope for rising up in the future. If he missed this chance, he could only be mediocre for the rest of his life, so he definitely could not miss this opportunity. "Shopkeeper, I feel that you should first ask whether or not this person can actually produce 1,000 spirit jades. I am very doubtful of this." Yuzha glanced at Lin Yi with hidden enmity. The shopkeeper paused. After looking Lin Yi up and down, he also seemed to be a bit doubtful. After all, Lin Yi's ordinary appearance really did not seem like someone who could casually produce 1,000 spirit jades. Lin Yi smiled and placed the bag on his back in front of them. He opened the bag for the two of them to see that it was filled to the brim with high-quality spirit jades. This was something he had specially prepared before entering the inner street. Yuzha was instantly shocked. He truly did not think that this unassuming, poor wandering cultivator would be able to casually produce so many spirit jades. But when he looked closely, a hint of ridicule appeared on Yuzha's face. He laughed coldly and said, "This bag of spirit jades does look like a lot, but there's 1,000? I don't think it's even half. You have the nerve to take this out and make a fool of yourself?" The shopkeeper to the side carefully calculated, then nodded and said, "From what I can see, there are about 400 spirit jades in this bag. It is indeed quite far from 1,000 spirit jades. Dear customer, if you can only produce these spirit jades, then I can only say my apologies." Heh. Shopkeeper has a good eye. Lin Yi smiled faintly. There were indeed only 400 spirit jades in the bag. Even though he still had some in the space in his jade pendant, and had even gotten 200 from Chen Heihu, some of these spirit jades were waste jades with insufficient spirit jades. They had been thrown into the space in his jade pendant for a short time and hadn't had time to fill up their spirit jades. Since you cannot produce 1,000 spirit jades, then what are you doing here? Then why are we still here? What a waste of time. Hearing this, Yuzha couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Turning his head towards the shopkeeper, he said, "Since that's the case, then I'll pay 1,000 spirit jades." Indeed, the shopkeeper nodded with some regret. He had originally thought that it would be a great situation where two tigers would compete for food. He could earn quite a lot of spirit jades from this, but he didn't expect Lin Yi to only be a bystander, only able to take out 400 spirit jades. He wasn't competitive at all. However, just as the shopkeeper and Yuzha were about to complete the transaction, Lin Yi suddenly spoke up, "Wait, if it's more than 400 spirit jades, I'll sell it to you. What if I add on these 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills?" The two of them stared blankly. Then they saw that at some point in time, an antique little box had appeared in Lin Yi's hand. Yuzha's heart sank. Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were also sold in the Hong Merchant Guild, and they were priced at 400 spirit jades. In other words, these 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were worth 800 spirit jades. Adding on the bag of 400 spirit jades, Lin Yi's bid was equivalent to 1,200 spirit jades, far exceeding his 1,000 spirit jades. Of course, he didn't think that Lin Yi was bragging. Even though the box wasn't open, if there was nothing inside, then Lin Yi would be making a fool of himself. "Dear customer, what do you say?" The shopkeeper turned to look at Yuzha. His meaning was clear. If he couldn't make a higher bid, then this unique piece of star inkstone would belong to Lin Yi. Yuzha was silent for a moment. He glared fiercely at Lin Yi. He was determined to get the star inkstone, and he wouldn't allow anyone to encroach on it. However, Lin Yi didn't even look at him. In a place like this, spirit jades always spoke. Whoever had more spirit jades would have the right to speak. No matter how much Yuzha glared at him, it was useless. "I bid 1,200 spirit jades." Yuzha finally gritted his teeth and said, "The foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill is worth 400 spirit jades. But that's the selling price. I don't think it's that high to buy it back." 1,200 spirit jades. This was the upper limit of what he could borrow. It was impossible to add even one more, because even if they wanted to borrow at a high interest rate, it depended on the person. If it was clearly beyond the upper limit of the person's ability to repay, they wouldn't lend it to you at all. Otherwise, it would be all for naught. Even if you killed the other party, you wouldn't be able to recoup your capital. Although he, Yuzha, was an inner sect disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, his background wasn't as deep as that of a young master like Su Lingchong. Normally, he could only borrow 1,000 spirit jades. Being able to borrow 200 more was already a favor price. Wanting to borrow more than that was impossible. However, although he could only offer 1,200 spirit jades, Yuzha was still confident that he could win this piece of star inkstone. Because although Lin Yi's 400 spirit jades and 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were also worth 1,200 spirit jades, One mustn't forget that the price of one Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was 400 spirit jades. This was the Hong Merchant Guild's own selling price. In other words, to the Hong Merchant Guild, the cost of a Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill wasn't even 400 spirit jades. In their eyes, it was already at most worth 300 spirit jades. Therefore, the two Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills that Lin Yi had taken out were at most worth 600 spirit jades. Adding on 400 spirit jades, it was actually equivalent to a bid of 1,000 spirit jades. Naturally, it couldn't compare to the 1,200 spirit jades he had. Actually, from this angle, Yuja believed that a bid of 1,100 spirit jades would completely overshadow Lin Yi's. However, he still chose to directly raise the price to the limit that he could afford. In order to ensure that he could win the Star Inkstone, he was throwing caution to the wind. As expected, the shopkeeper nodded and said to Lin Yi, "That's right. Although the price of the Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill is 400 spirit jades, if you want to use it as payment, then it must be calculated according to the recovery price. I can only give you 300 spirit jades. Two Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spirit jades can only be considered as payment of 1,000 spirit jades." Chapter 37-38. By accepting Lin Yi's two Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spirit jades, the Hong Merchant Association could save themselves the trouble of purchasing goods. But now that Yuja had called out a price of 1,200, it was equivalent to the two Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills being exchanged for spirit jades at the price of 400 per pill. Even the trouble of selling them would be saved. Yuja looked at Lin Yi with a face full of mockery. He was already 90% sure that he would get this piece of inkstone. From what he saw, unless Lin Yi had no other choice, he definitely wouldn't take out two Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills as a bargaining chip. This was probably the entire fortune of this poor wandering cultivator. There was no way he could take out more spirit jades than him. However, Lin Yi opened his mouth and asked in reply, "That's not necessarily the case, right? In the pill display cabinets outside, I saw the same pill with different prices. Could it be that these pills are all sold at the same price?" Hearing this, before the shopkeeper could reply, Yuja, who was at the side, couldn't help but laugh loudly. He pointed at Lin Yi and mocked, as expected of a poor wandering cultivator who hasn't seen the world. "Let me explain to you. Look at those high-priced pills, they're all imported from Middle Island. They're personally refined by a high-level alchemist there. How can they be the same price as locally produced ones? I don't know where you got your pills from, but how can they compare to Master Middle Island's? Ha ha ha." Lin Yi smiled faintly and didn't say anything to refute. He only opened the lid of the box in front of the two of them. Hiss! Looking at the two snow-white pills with faint halos, the shopkeeper couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He hurriedly pounced forward to examine them carefully, even bringing a special magnifying glass from the side. However, Yuja didn't see anything strange. Although he could recognize that these were Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills, he was just a normal cultivator after all. He wasn't a merchant who specialized in trading like the shopkeeper, and he definitely wasn't an expert alchemist. Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were pills that he would only think of when he was breaking through a barrier. At other times, he wouldn't even have the chance to come into contact with them. However, he saw the shopkeeper's unusual reaction. He was somewhat puzzled. Wasn't it just two Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills? What was so rare about it? Although the value of the Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was not low, it was still a very common pill. If it was replaced with the Foundation establishment pill, it would still be acceptable. Yuja disapprovingly curled his lips, but for the sake of the Star Inkstone, he could only patiently remind, "Shopkeeper, these are just two ordinary Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. According to what you just said, they are worth at most 300 spirit jades each. Even if you add 400 spirit jades, they still can't compare to my bid of 1,200 spirit jades. Just by looking at this kid's poor appearance, you can tell that it's impossible for him to increase the price. What's there to hesitate about? Hurry up, don't waste time." His incessant chatter finally interrupted the shopkeeper's attempt to take a closer look. The shopkeeper stopped and looked at him with a strange expression. Do you still think that this customer's foundation-breaking pellet is only worth 300 spirit jades? Even though the shopkeeper hid his expression very well, Yuja could still clearly feel the mockery hidden within. Yuja's face reddened, and he forcefully suppressed his anger. Is it not? The shopkeeper helplessly shook his head. Even though he felt disdain in his heart, as a businessman, amiability always brought wealth. If he didn't explain it clearly face to face, this Yuja would probably continue to pester him. He could only patiently say, "You just said that even if it's the same foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, how much it's worth depends on the quality, right?" "That's right, so what?" Yuja suddenly had a bad feeling. The shopkeeper patiently explained, "Even if it's the same foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, the quality is ordinary, so what?" The shopkeeper patiently explained, "Even if it's the same foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, the quality is ordinary. It can only guarantee a breakthrough to the early stage of foundation establishment or the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. If you reach the middle stage of foundation establishment, it will be very difficult to have any obvious effect. So the recovery price is at most 300 spirit jades. But if it's imported from the middle island, the higher quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill can guarantee a successful breakthrough even after the middle stage of foundation establishment. The recovery price can be over 400 spirit jades." "So what?" "Shopkeeper, you can't be thinking of telling me that this poor loose cultivator somehow got his hands on a foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, and that the quality is comparable to Master Nakajima's foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, right?" Yuja sneered as he glanced at Lin Yi. Lin Yi responded with a calm smile. He didn't take the other party's provocation to heart at all. Because he didn't need to say anything, there would naturally be people who would slap the other party's face for him. "That's not it." The shopkeeper shook his head. "Then that's incredible." Yuja's heart instantly relaxed. He was really afraid that this poor loose cultivator, Lin Yi, would somehow get his hands on two high-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. After all, although the probability of this happening wasn't high, if he really ran into some dog-shit luck, there was still a trace of a possibility. However, before he could heave a sigh of relief, the shopkeeper gave him a meaningful look. His eyes seemed to be speechless and pitying at the same time. Only then did he open his mouth and continue, "However, other than the normal and high-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills, there is also a type called the top quality. Miracle Dr. Danzhong Liju's extreme quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was guaranteed to have 100% effect even in the later stages of the foundation. I'm sure you've heard of this before, sir?" Miracle Dr. Danzhong Liju, as a top-level character who came from the North Island, had long become a name card of the North Island. If a practitioner from the North Island hadn't heard of Zhang Liju's story, then they would be too embarrassed to go out and meet people. Elixir God's product must be extreme quality. Yuja had heard this phrase countless times, and naturally, he had heard of Liju's creation of the ultimate-level foundation-breaking elixir. It was said that back in the day, Zhang Liju had casually sold a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pellet, and the price was easily raised to thousands of spirit jades. It didn't matter how many spirit jades you had, you might not even be able to get one. Normal high-quality foundation-breaking pellets simply couldn't compare to it. "What do you mean? Extreme quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill? That's something only a elixir god like Master Zhang can make. Not only does it need to be sold for thousands of spirit jades, but it also needs a deep background to be able to buy it. What does it have to do with a poor loose cultivator like him?" Yuja was confused after hearing the shopkeeper's words. Chapter 37-39. After all, he had been in the library for 3 whole years, and he knew everything in the world without even stepping out. Yuja wasn't a refiner, but he knew quite a lot about these things. As far as he knew, in the entire 5 islands of Sky Class, there were only a handful of refiners in history who could concoct a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pill. After all, someone like Zhang Liju was a genius that appeared once every few hundred years, and no one else could even hope to catch up to him. Normally speaking, Being able to concoct a high-quality foundation-breaking pill was already considered very rare in the elixir world. In the entire island of Sky Class, there weren't many refiners who could do this, and the North Island's own elixir hall couldn't even concoct it. As for the legendary supreme-grade foundation-breaking pill, that was pure wishful thinking. Plus, even if this poor solo practitioner was lucky enough to get his hands on 2 supreme-grade foundation-breaking pills, he wouldn't even be able to hide it. How could he just take it out to trade? However, the shopkeeper's next words made Yuja, who had made a solemn vow, dumbstruck. I'm sorry, even though the highest quality foundation-breaking pill is a legend, the 2 pills placed in front of us are the real deal. Sir, you're a real man. I apologize for my rudeness just now. With that, the shopkeeper bowed to Lin Yi. A customer who could casually take out 2 supreme-grade foundation-breaking pills like this was a living god of wealth in their eyes. You flatter me. Lin Yi quickly helped him up. Although the shopkeeper wasn't very friendly with him just now, there wasn't anything to criticize about him. He was still rather neutral. However, Yuja, who was at the side, was completely dumbfounded when he heard this. What the hell? How is that possible? Shopkeeper, you're wrong. How could this poor guy take out a top-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill? And 2 of them? Who the hell would believe that? Yuja was stunned for a while before blurting out. However, his voice hadn't even finished resounding out when the manager's originally amiable expression sank. Saying that the manager had made an error of judgment was like scolding a bald donkey in front of a monk, and it was simply a slap to the face. Furthermore, a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pellet was such an important and rare item. How could he have misjudged it? Customer, it's up to you whether you believe in my judgment or not. However, if you speak rudely, I can take it as a provocation to our Hong Chamber of Commerce. Please conduct yourself with dignity, the shopkeeper said with a cold and stern face. As if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, Yuja suddenly came to his senses. The Hong Chamber of Commerce was a colossus that even the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions had to treat with respect. As an inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he could still find a sense of superiority in other places, but in front of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was not even worth a fart. Not to mention how severe the consequences of offending the Hong Chamber of Commerce would be. Just take the current situation as an example. The star inkstone that he yearned for day and night was still in the hands of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Yuja hurriedly smiled sheepishly and tried to salvage the situation. Shopkeeper, please don't take it to heart. I was just anxious and made a slip of the tongue. Only then did the shopkeeper's expression soften a little. Looking at him, he said, just these 2 top-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills alone, even if the lowest recovery price is 800 spirit jades per pill, it would still be worth it. It was already worth 1,600 pieces of spiritual jades. Adding the additional 400 spiritual jades, it was a total of 2,000 spiritual jades. Dear customer, if you can't offer a price of 2,000 spiritual jades or more, then I will have to pay. Then don't even think about getting that piece of staring stone. Even though he said that, in the shopkeeper's heart, even if Yuja could take out 2,000 spiritual jades, it wouldn't be enough to make up for Lin Yi's 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. After all, if it was in the name of a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pill. By attracting a group of second-generation cultivators to participate in the auction, the true profits that could be generated would definitely be far greater than 2,000 spiritual jades. 3,000 for 1,000 was not a problem at all. 2,000 spiritual jades? Fuck, why don't you just rob someone? Yuja was so agitated that his eyeballs almost popped out of his head. Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough to cover his mouth with one hand. Only then did he manage to prevent himself from cursing out loud. Otherwise, he probably would have been thrown out on the spot. Just now, he had called out a price of 1,200 spiritual jades, which was already his limit. He had even taken an extremely large risk. 2,000 spiritual jades, even if you beat him to death, he wouldn't be able to take it out. Not to mention how shocked Yuja was. At this moment, even Lin Yi, the owner of the supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he heard the shopkeeper's words. Before, he only knew that the value of a supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was definitely much higher than a normal foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, but he didn't expect it to be this high. But after thinking about it for a moment, Lin Yi very quickly figured out the reason. After all, a supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was not the same as a normal foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill. This was a rare resource that could only be encountered by luck. As the saying goes, the rarer something is, the greater its value. For the shopkeeper to convert these two supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills into 1,600 spiritual jades, this was already a very, very low price. If they were to really sell it, the price would at least double. Moreover, no matter how high the price, there would definitely be people fighting to buy it. Especially those second-generation cultivators with truly deep backgrounds. In order to get their hands on such a rare treasure, they wouldn't care about this bit of spiritual jades. However, although he had underestimated the value of these two supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills, Lin Yi didn't feel the pain of losing out. After all, to him, as long as he had the materials prepared, he could refine another foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill at any time, and he would definitely be able to refine a supreme-grade one. However, there was only one star inkstone, and if he missed it, there would be no more. Thus, two supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spiritual jades in exchange for a single star inkstone was absolutely worth it. The shopkeeper waited for a moment. Seeing that Yuja's face had turned red and he didn't say anything, he said, "Time is precious. Dear customer, if you cannot quickly give a higher price, then this old man can only announce that the star inkstone is not fated with you." Not fated with me? How can it not be fated with me? I've endured hardships in the scripture pavilion for a full 3 years before finally discovering this priceless treasure that could change my fate. For this, not only did I borrow a high-interest loan of 1,200 spiritual jades, I even thought about it day and night for an entire month, and now I've actually announced that it's not fated with me. Fuck you, it's not fated with me. At this moment, Yuja's expression had already become extremely twisted and sinister. It was only because he still had a last shred of reason that he was able to tightly bite his lip and not say anything. Because he knew that if he spoke the slightest bit rudely now, then he would have to face the overseeing experts of the Hong Merchant Guild. The strength of these people was comparable to the core disciples of the 3 great pavilions, and they were not people that he, Yuja, could afford to offend. Chapter 3740. Seeing him gnash his teeth in anger, the shopkeeper couldn't help but shake his head, then directly announced, "Looks like the result is already very obvious. Sir, can I ask you to step back for a moment?" The shopkeeper's expression was still polite, but his words were not courteous at all. Yuja knew that if he stepped back now, that would mean that this unique star inkstone that he had been longing for would belong to Lin Yi, and he would have to return empty-handed. This meant that he, Yuja, had worked so hard for so long, but in the end, not only did he end up with nothing, he even carried a body of debt because of it. One had to know that although the 1,200 pieces of spirit jade he had borrowed were still piled up in his cave residence and hadn't been put to use, he still had to pay an enormous amount of interest every day. He had only borrowed it for a few short days, but just the interest alone had already reached a shocking 3 digits, and it would only roll up in the future. Originally, if he had been able to successfully obtain the star inkstone, Yuja wouldn't have cared about this bit of spirit jade at all. As long as he became stronger in the future, not only would these people not ask him to return the spirit jade, but they would instead rush to give him spirit jade, using him as their protective umbrella. But now, his originally beautiful vision was instantly shattered, and what awaited him was cruel reality. Those high-interest lenders would definitely come knocking on his door to force him to pay back the debt, and with his current strength, he couldn't afford to offend these people. One had to know that these people weren't good people. In this way, how miserable his fate would be in the future, even using his toes to think about it could be imagined. In a short instant, he had fallen from heaven to hell. At this time, Yuja wasn't just roaring in his heart, he was hysterical, and he was gradually going crazy. But no matter how hysterical he was, Yuja didn't show it on his face. To the bystanders, he was just silently and unwillingly biting his lip. Nothing more. Yuja glanced at Lin Yi sinisterly, then turned and walked out of the private room. This star inkstone will forever belong to me and me alone. No one can snatch it away. A mere grassroots wandering practitioner dares to fight with me. He really doesn't even know how to write the word death. Sir, when you leave our Hong Merchant Guild later, you have to be careful. Looking at Yuja's departing figure, the shopkeeper couldn't help but remind Lin Yi. He had been in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades and had met countless people. He had seen this kind of situation many times. No matter how well a brat like Yuja hid, he couldn't escape his fiery eyes. Thanks for the reminder. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Actually, there was no need for the shopkeeper to remind him. Just now, when the other party had looked at him, he had already felt a sharp killing intent. Although it was hidden very deeply, the insidiousness within it was enough to make one tremble in fear. If he couldn't even detect this, then he would be too slow. It seemed like it would be a little troublesome to go out later. Lin Yi sighed inwardly. From the opponent's aura, he could tell that the opponent's strength should be around the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, which was a level higher than his. Although he was never afraid of challenging those with higher cultivation levels, the risk was not small. However, it was just a little risky. Lin Yi had killed his way up from the mortal world. He never knew what fear was. So what if the other party was a middle-stage foundation building expert? If he really didn't know what was good for him and bumped into him, a massacre might begin. Lin Yi had been on the Heavenly Island for more than a month, but he had never killed anyone. Looking at Lin Yi's calm and composed performance, the shopkeeper immediately thought even more highly of him. Because Lin Yi didn't deliberately hide his aura, he could tell that Lin Yi was a peak early-stage foundation building expert. And as a peak early-stage foundation building expert, when faced with the threat of a middle-stage foundation building expert, he could still maintain such a calm and composed attitude. However, he was still able to maintain such a calm composure. This was quite a rare thing. If it was someone else, they would have already panicked and didn't know how to deal with it. It seemed like this customer was able to casually take out 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills because he had a strong background, and not because he got lucky. After this bit of admiration, the shopkeeper's attitude was much more polite and attentive than before. He took the initiative to ask, "I am Hong Zhong. May I know your name?" Under normal circumstances, a shopkeeper like Hong Zhong was obviously more polite and attentive. Even if he was polite to others, it was only on the surface. He rarely took the initiative to tell others his name. After all, although he was just a shopkeeper of a branch, the Hong's Chamber of Commerce was a first-class top chamber of commerce in Middle Island. Any shopkeeper of a branch had huge resources in his hands. Even the top figures of the 3 pavilions in the North Island were jealous of him. His identity and status were self-evident. Even the core disciples of the 3 pavilions couldn't be compared with him. What's more, Hong Zhong's surname was Hong. The meaning behind this was self-evident. Although Hong Zhong was a collateral relative of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was still a member of the Hong family. Since he took the initiative to ask for the guest's name, it meant that the guest had become a special guest that the Hong Enterprises Chamber of Commerce needed to take special care of. This was a good thing that many people yearned for. In the whole North Island, there were not many people who had this qualification. "My surname is Lin, and my name is Air." Lin Yi bowed slightly as he replied. "So it's young hero Lin. How about we start the transaction now? You can have a look at what you want first." Hong Zhong knew that Lin Yi couldn't wait to get his hands on the star inkstone. So he immediately pushed the wooden box containing the star inkstone in front of Lin Yi and suggested, "Okay." Lin Yi nodded. He opened the box and looked at it carefully. After confirming that it was the same star inkstone he saw last time, he said, "I have no problem with it." "Okay." Hong Zhong immediately packed up the wooden box, and Lin Yi naturally handed over his 2 supreme-grade bottleneck-breaking pills and the bag of 400 pieces of spirit jade on the ground to him. One handed over the money, and the other handed over the goods. After the money and goods were settled, Lin Yi finally felt relieved. The star inkstone he had been dreaming of was finally in his hands. Although he didn't know what it was used for at the moment, he would know after he went back and asked the ghost. Something that could attract the attention of this big shot of the Spirit Beast clan must be a treasure that could only be encountered by chance. After the transaction, Hong Zhong took out a dark green jade card from the cabinet and handed it to Lin Yi. Young hero Lin, this is a Spirit Jade card. It is recognized and used not only by our Hong Enterprises Chamber of Commerce, but also by all the other large regular merchants on the 5 Heaven Stage Islands. Can be used as a substitute for real Spirit Jade. This way, when you buy such valuable items next time, you can directly use the Spirit Jade card. You won't have to struggle to carry a whole bag of Spirit Jade like this time. That was equivalent to the Union Pay card in the secular world. Chapter 3741. The pure spiritual energy inside circulated, as if it contained an extremely exquisite miniature formation. This was obviously a very rare and high-quality item. And in the middle of the Spirit Jade card, there was a number, 400. Lin Yi immediately turned his head to look at Hong Zhong in surprise. Did this mean that the extra bag of 400 pieces of Spirit Jade was directly returned to him in the form of a Spirit Jade card? Hong Zhong smiled at the right time and said, "This is a small token of my humble shop. Please accept it. If you have a large amount of Spirit Jade, you can find a large merchant like our Hong Merchant Guild at any time and ask them to top up the Spirit Jade into the Spirit Jade card." After a pause, seeing that Lin Yi seemed to have some doubts, Hong Zhong continued to explain, "Young hero Lin, please do not worry. The Spirit Jade card has a special miniature formation to protect it. As long as you input your chi to activate it, the miniature formation inside will recognize your unique chi characteristics. No one else can imitate it, change it, or destroy it. And if you need to make a transaction, you only need to input your chi to combine it with another Spirit Jade card to make a payment. It is convenient and safe, because every time you use the Spirit Jade card at a large merchant guild, you will leave relevant information at the merchant union, so even if you accidentally lose it, it is fine. You can find the merchant union to make a replacement." So, wasn't this a union link card that had been personally authenticated by Qi? If it was really as Hong Zhong said, then the security of this Spirit Jade card was indeed quite high. There was the possibility of someone chopping off their finger to impersonate their fingerprint. But for this Spirit Jade card, unless Lin Yi actively input his chi for it to identify, even if others killed him, they would not be able to take away even a piece of Spirit Jade. "Then thank you very much, shopkeeper Hong." Lin Yi nodded his head in gratitude. Although he had the space in the Jade Pendant and did not need to worry about things like storing Spirit Jade, if he wanted to go to a place like the Hong Merchant Guild to buy treasures, it would still be a little troublesome. In order to prevent the secret of the space in the Jade Pendant from being exposed, he had to first take out the Spirit Jade in a place with no one around, then carry it to the Merchant Guild to buy things. Like today, a few hundred Spirit Jade was not a big deal. He could carry it, but what if he needed thousands or even tens of thousands of Spirit Jade in the future? He couldn't possibly carry it back and forth, right? Thus, this Spirit Jade card was very useful at this time. Moreover, since the Merchant Union, whose influence spread throughout the 5 Great Islands, came forward to vouch for them, their credibility was not an issue. Naturally, there was no reason not to accept it. Young hero Lin is too polite. For an important guest like you, preparing a Spirit Jade card for you is a matter of mutual benefit. It will also make it convenient for you to take care of our business in the future, so there is no need to thank me. Oh right, if you use the Spirit Jade card in the various chambers of commerce under the Merchant Union, you can get a 10% discount, Hong Zhong said politely with a smile. 10% discount? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows. In the future, if he were to use this card to purchase some treasures, he would be able to save quite a bit of spiritual jade. It seemed that the Commerce Union had put in quite a bit of capital in order to attract big customers. In fact, on this point, Lin Yi was wrong. Although the Spirit Jade card was an important measure pushed out by the Merchant Union to protect their big customers. But while it was used for transactions, it was essentially a symbol of status. It was not that easy to obtain. Not to mention the fact that it was difficult for ordinary people to obtain one, even some second-generation cultivators with a good background, if their status or wealth did not reach a certain threshold, would not be able to obtain such a Spirit Jade card. To put it bluntly, in the entire world of cultivators, those who could produce a spirit jade card, that person was definitely rich and powerful. And for Lin Yi to be able to obtain this spirit jade card today, it was all thanks to the 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills. Otherwise, he would not have been able to obtain the true approval of the Hong Merchant Union even if he had paid thousands of spiritual jade for a single star inkstone. Moreover, he would not have been able to obtain a spirit jade card from Hong Zhong for no reason. There were even 400 spiritual jade cards in it. Hong Zhong's actions clearly meant that he was planning on taking the long haul, fishing for a big fish. Based on his years of experience with countless people, this young man who called himself Lin Er, although he looked ordinary at first glance, in reality, he was a person who hid his strength deeply. Not to mention the fact that this guy, who was only at the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment, could remain calm and composed in the face of the threat of a mid-stage foundation establishment expert. Just the fact that he could casually produce 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills was enough to prove that this person was not to be trifled with. Regardless of where he had obtained these 2 foundation barrier-breaking pills, treasures of heaven and earth had always belonged to the strong. For this Lin Er to be able to casually produce 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills either meant that he was hiding a powerful strength, or that he had a powerful background. There was no third possibility. As for the so-called dogshit luck, Hong Zhong had been the shopkeeper of the Hong Merchant Union for so many years and had seen all kinds of people and things. He had long since recognized this point. In this world of cultivators where cunning people were everywhere and crafty plots and schemes were everywhere, anything that seemed to be a coincidence actually hid a hidden certainty. There was no such thing as dogshit luck. Treasures like the top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills would only fall into the hands of the strong. There were no exceptions. And those who believed that dogshit luck existed in the world of cultivation, in the end, had not lived long enough to understand. They believed that other people were just idiots who had dogshit luck, but in reality, they themselves were the idiots who had been deceived by appearances. Powerful strength and powerful background, these two were definitely one. Thus, in Hong Zhong's eyes, Lin Yi naturally had value in befriending and developing. Gifting Lin Yi a spirit jade card and 400 spirit jades was just a test. If Lin Yi's performance in the future became even more awesome, even greater benefits were yet to come. Thank you, shopkeeper Hong, for your kindness. Then I will take my leave first. Lin Yi put away the spirit jade card and the star inkstone, stood up and said his goodbyes. Young hero Lin, take care. Hong Zhong stood up to send him off. Before he left, he added, young hero Lin, in the future, if you have something as good as a top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pill that you want to sell, there is no harm in taking care of our Hong Merchant Union's business. When the time comes, if the accumulated value is considerable, this old man can help you upgrade your Spirit Jade card to a VIP Spirit Jade card, allowing you to enjoy a 20% discount and even more benefits. As a businessman, Hong Zhong was actually more curious than anyone else. Why was Lin Yi able to produce 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills? But even if he thought with his toes, he would know that this involved personal privacy. If he asked on the spot, then he wouldn't be Hong Zhong. Chapter 3742. As an old shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades, Hong Zhong's grasp of people's hearts could only be described with one word: shrewd and ruthless. All right, then I'll have to trouble you when the time comes. Lin Yi nodded and turned to leave. Lin Yi's heart was as clear as a mirror why Hong Zhong was so attentive to him. To put it bluntly, it was because of the 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills that gave rise to all sorts of mysterious speculations. He wanted to rope Lin Yi in and create more profits for them. This was something that every businessman with foresight would do. It was just that this shopkeeper gene was more experienced and outstanding, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Lin Yi was not averse to this kind of thing. In reality, when he first came to Heaven Stage Island, he was in need of this kind of business partner. After all, of the 4 most important things for cultivators: wealth, dharma, companionship, and land, wealth ranked first. Only with a strong wealth could one ensure an endless supply of treasures and level up quickly, all the way to the top of the cultivation world. This wealth, of course, did not refer to the wealth of the secular world, but the hard currency of the cultivation world, such as spirit jades. Although Lin Yi could secretly hide 2 or 3 pieces of spirit jades in the spirit jade mining area every day, and sometimes he could use Meng Tong's group to exchange their waste jades for good jades to increase a little, in the end, it could only be considered a small business and was far from reaching the level of wealth. If he really wanted to unleash the full potential of money, he'd have to make it big. Unavoidably, he'd need to find a reliable business partner. That was the only way he'd be able to unleash his trump cards to the fullest, paving the way for future growth. From the short contact just now, Hong Zhong, the old shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, definitely had the ability to become his business partner. If they could really work closely together, with Lin Yi's trump cards and Hong Zhong's shrewd business ability, it would not be difficult for them to make a name for themselves in the future. Of course, time revealed a person's heart. This matter was related to the future. Lin Yi had to carefully investigate the importance of this matter. Unless he truly knew everything, he would not easily treat anyone as a business partner. At most, he would just use each other. After all, this was a matter of life and death, so he could not be too cautious. After leaving the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi was not in a hurry to return to the welcoming pavilion. Instead, he leisurely strolled around the inner street 2 more times. After all, the inner street was only open to the public once a month. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, he naturally had to familiarize himself with it. There were some things that, even if he didn't buy them for the time being, he still had to have an idea in mind. If he could use them in the future, he would be able to use them. He wouldn't be wasting his energy like a headless fly. After strolling through the inner streets, Lin Yi finally left the city square and prepared to return to the welcoming pavilion. However, just as he reached a deserted alley, the jade pendant suddenly began to sound a warning. A fatal sneak attack was about to happen. An extremely sharp sword chi came from a very tricky angle and attacked Lin Yi's back from 100 feet away. It was so fast that it was impossible to defend against it. Relying on the speed bonus of the gale-chasing lightning boots, Lin Yi instantly displayed the butterfly subtle steps to the extreme. Only then did he twist his body, barely dodging the menacing fatal blow. Even so, he still felt a lingering fear in his heart. This sword chi wasn't dazzling and dazzling. At first glance, it looked sloppy and ordinary. Even the sword chi released by many Heaven Stage experts could be 100 times stronger than this. However, the power of the two could not be mentioned in the same breath. If the power of the sword chi of those Heaven Stage experts was said to be 1, which Lin Yi could completely disregard, then the power of the sword chi was at least 800 or even 1,000. If Lin Yi hadn't been able to dodge in time, the only outcome would have been death. If not for the Jade Pendant's life-saving warning, Lin Yi might have already reported to the underworld. Even if Lin Yi wanted to heal, he would need time. Wouldn't the other party take the opportunity to stab him again? Heh! A mere grassroots loose cultivator was actually able to dodge my life-seizing consecutive sword 22 styles. Not bad. A familiar figure slowly walked out from the tree trunk by the roadside. It was Yu Zhe, who had just competed for the Star Inkstone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce. As expected, it was this fellow. Lin Yi had long expected this. Previously, when this fellow was at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he had already revealed a cold-killing intent. It was just that he didn't dare to make a move in that kind of situation. After leaving the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi intentionally circled the inner street twice. Actually, the main reason was to find out this fellow's position, because he knew that this fellow would definitely follow him and attack him. However, the result was somewhat unexpected. After circling the inner street twice, even with Lin Yi's perception, he still couldn't find any traces of this fellow. Only then did he helplessly give up and leave the market. In reality, from the time he left the market until now, it had already been a full 30 minutes. Even with Lin Yi's cautiousness, he couldn't help but start to wonder if this fellow had already given up. Thus, a moment of carelessness brought danger. Although Lin Yi's expression was calm, he secretly sighed in his heart. If it wasn't for the Jade Pendant's warning, just now, this fellow really would have succeeded. This fellow clearly knew that he was at the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. With the strength of a mid-stage foundation establishment expert, he still foolishly followed him for so long before making a move. Moreover, he didn't care about his dignity at all and chose to launch an unavoidable sneak attack. Whether it was patience or cautiousness, it clearly showed that this fellow was definitely not an ordinary person. Compared to his superficial performance at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was like a completely different person. Looking at the strong confidence displayed in Yu's playful expression, Lin Yi's heart instantly tightened. This fellow had already been acting since the time at the Hong Chamber of Commerce. The superficiality he displayed at that time was completely an act to numb him and make him think that this person was only so. This fellow was far more powerful and cunning than the likes of Meng Jueguang. This was an out-and-out strong enemy. Lin Yi's expression didn't change as he stared at the other party's every move, but his heart was already extremely vigilant. Although he had been at Heaven Stage Island for more than a month, he had already seen many strong people, and even personally felt the power of an elder-level expert. Their strength was far above this person in front of him. However, at the end of the day, these people that he had seen before were not real enemies. They had never so openly displayed their killing intent towards Lin Yi. Even if it was Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang who had deep grudges against him, if they wanted to kill him, they would have to rack their brains to find a suitable opportunity. They wouldn't be like this person in front of him, directly killing him without saying anything. Chapter 37:43. Lin Yi laughed bitterly to himself. After wearing this thing, he could hide his identity and do many things that were originally inconvenient, but at the same time it was equivalent to losing a layer of protection. Don't forget, the three great pavilions always valued newcomers. Anything that involved newcomers was not a small matter, especially if a newcomer was killed, it would definitely alarm the enforcement hall. As a result, even a young master with a deep background like Su Lingchong didn't dare to use simple and crude methods to deal with Lin Yi. He could only use some underhanded schemes. As for other people, they didn't have the guts to do so. Even if they became enemies with Lin Yi, they definitely wouldn't dare to directly kill him. But right now it was different. Because he was wearing the Thousand Silk Mask, Lin Yi was no longer Lin Yi but Lin Air. Lin Yi was a newcomer to Blue Cloud Pavilion. But this Lin Air was only a grassroots wandering cultivator of unknown origin. Killing Lin Yi, a Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomer, would cause enormous trouble. But if it was just killing Lin Air, a grassroots wandering cultivator, then nothing would happen. As long as it wasn't in broad daylight, the enforcement hall wouldn't care if you committed murder or arson. What did the life and death of a mere grassroots wandering cultivator have to do with them? If you're a little smarter, then hurry up and hand over the inkstone. That way I might be able to quell my anger a bit, and I'll leave your corpse intact. Yu just stared at Lin Yi with a mocking expression, not immediately attacking. He wasn't the slightest bit afraid that Lin Yi would escape. Because in the current situation, Lin Yi was like a mouse that had been forced into a corner by a cat. There was no way for him to escape. A mere peak early-stage foundation establishment wandering cultivator, facing a middle-stage foundation establishment intersect disciple like him, still wanted to escape? How could he escape? Can I ask, what is the use of this star inkstone? Lin Yi was unhurried, raising his eyebrows as he asked. Of course, he didn't really want to know the use of the star inkstone. This kind of thing didn't need the other party to explain. When he returned, the ghost would naturally explain to him. The reason why he intentionally asked this was because he wanted to know how much the other party knew. From there, he could make a judgment. Just how important was it to kill him? That's right, Lin Yi wasn't thinking about escaping, but counterattacking. Although his opponent was a middle-stage foundation establishment expert, and even among middle-stage foundation establishment experts, Lin Yi still had the confidence to kill him. Although it was very difficult to challenge someone of a higher level, at the same time, it also had a unique advantage, and that was the natural appearance of a weakling. He could pretend to be a pig to eat the tiger. No matter how cautious his opponent was, he would more or less underestimate his opponent because he thought that he had the absolute upper hand. This was inevitable human nature. The cunning and cruel opponent in front of him was the same. Otherwise, this guy would have killed him long ago. He wouldn't even stop to talk nonsense. Regardless of the level of an expert, underestimating the enemy was always a flaw. Especially when facing a so-called weakling like Lin Yi who had a powerful trump card. This flaw was especially fatal. You don't know the uses of starring stones? After hearing Lin Yi's question, Yu Zhe was clearly dazed. He didn't know that Lin Yi had so many twists and turns. He had thought that Lin Yi just wanted to clarify things before he died. Yu Zhe had a ruminating expression as he sized up Lin Yi. He didn't know the uses of starring stones, but he still dared to take out 2 supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills. This meant that not only was this wandering cultivator not poor at all, but he was a rare nouveau riche. I only know that this thing isn't simple. As for its uses, I don't know. Lin Yi responded coolly. Heh. Then prepare to die with everlasting regret. You aren't so naive as to think that Laozi will be so merciful as to tell you, right? You're really delusional. Who do you think Laozi is, an idiot? Yu Zhe laughed coldly, and a hint of savagery flashed through his eyes. He seemed to be preparing to attack. Lin Yi's heart instantly sank. This guy was not easy to deal with. But then, he heard Yu Zhe continue. But if you hand over something valuable, like a supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill, then Laozi can let you die knowing. Ha, so he wanted to use this opportunity to extort a sum of money. The corner of Lin Yi's mouth curved imperceptibly. He reached into his bosom. When he took it out again, there was a small box in his hand, just like the one he had in the Hong Merchant Guild. He opened the lid. Inside was a supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill. Last time, he had refined a total of 6 pills. He had given 2 to senior apprentice brother Bitter, eaten 1 for Lin Yi, and used 2 to exchange for starring stones. The one in his hand was the last one. Seeing the supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill, Yu Zhe's face was filled with greed. Putting aside the fact that the starring stone was a priceless treasure that could change the course of one's fate, the supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill was a fatal temptation to any Foundation Establishment cultivator, even those at the peak of the late stage. This Yu Zhe in front of him was no exception. At the end of the day, even if he could obtain the starring stone, he wouldn't be able to use it immediately. Right now, the practicality of a supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill was far above it. Moreover, this was also a priceless treasure that could only be found by luck. Anything else? If you can take out even more good stuff that satisfies Laozi, then maybe I can consider letting you go. Yu Zhe purposely tempted. Letting me go? Hearing this, Lin Yi couldn't help but twitch his mouth. This guy really did think he was an idiot. If he really took out even more valuable treasures, this guy would probably immediately start killing and plundering. There was no way he would let Lin Yi go. That's it. Now you can speak, right? Lin Yi said expressionlessly. Hearing this, Yu Zhe couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. That really is a pity. But to be able to obtain a supreme-grade Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill, today's trip was not in vain. Of course, I believe that you're definitely hiding some good stuff on you. Since you don't want to take it out yourself, then I'll take it out for you. As he spoke, Yu Zhe's feet instantly exploded, and he pounced towards Lin Yi at a speed that was hard to follow with the naked eye. From start to finish, he had never thought of telling Lin Yi anything, and had even less thought of sparing Lin Yi's life. The reason why he spoke so much nonsense was only because he wanted to extort even more good stuff from Lin Yi. However, since Lin Yi wasn't willing to take it out of his own accord, then he wouldn't force it. In any case, after he killed Lin Yi, these things would still fall into his hands. It was just that, during the course of battle, they might be damaged by the sword chi. But since the situation had already developed to this point, if it was damaged, then so be it. He would kill first and talk later. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.